My wife suggested open marriage for 2 weeks, cheated, and now regrets my cheating revenge. This weekend began just like any other Saturday. Hank woke up later than usual, and he gave his wife of 17 years a morning kiss. She grumbled, "Hank, let me sleep. I can't catch a break with you at night or in the morning, and the girls are probably awake by now." Hank replied, "You're right, they're grown-ups. They won't barge into our bedroom. Let me sleep." Hank got out of bed, put on a robe, and headed to the shower. On his way, he heard some noise and commotion in their eldest daughter Alice's room. He realized that Gwen, her sister, was pulling her out of bed, so he left them be. After freshening up, he dressed and made his way to the kitchen. His daughters, having had enough of waiting, were already sitting at the table. Alice asked, "Are we having breakfast today? Are you hungry? We still have to go to school." Hank responded, "Why? I don't know. You girls are on New Year's vacation. You're going to Grandma's." Alice inquired, "And you? You're on vacation and you have a long weekend. It's all Mom's decision." Hank suggested, "You can make your own breakfast." Gwen added, "We could, but Mom won't let us. She thinks we'd mess up the pans and burn everything. All she knows how to make is scrambled eggs." Hank asked, "Do you want oatmeal or semolina porridge like they have in England?" Alice said, "Oatmeal, please, sir." Hank smiled, "Or in this case, oatmeal, Miss Daddy. We'll leave the oats for the horses." Hank instructed, "Make semolina without lumps. Done and done. Now go wash your face and brush your teeth. The porridge will be ready in 15 minutes. Hank quickly prepared breakfast for his daughters. Meanwhile, Judy came out of the bedroom and went into the bathroom. The daughters sat down to eat, and Judy soon returned, her hair neatly combed. Hank looked at his wife, dressed in his shirt, and even after all these years, she still excited him. He recognized her beauty, even though every man has his own idea of what's beautiful in a woman. He loved her, but there was a significant barrier between them. Judy took her seat at the table and said to her daughters, "Finish your meal and get ready slowly. Today, Daddy will take you to your grandmother's." Alice protested, "Mom, you promised we'd go to the ski center for a week. We've already prepared our ski gear and we wanted to celebrate New Year's Eve together." Judy replied, "Girls, in life we don't always get what we want, but we'll definitely go to the ski center for spring break when there's no more snow, or should we go to Palmer? They say there's year-round snow in the mountains. Now, finish up and get ready." Hank didn't like the idea of sending the kids to his mother-in-law, especially after the deception about the trip they were preparing for. He sensed a cooling in their relationship, which coincided with the arrival of Richard, the new commercial director at Judy's workplace. Hank knew Judy had known Richard from university, but she hadn't mentioned her new boss to him. It worried him, but he trusted that his wife would resist the temptation of an affair with Richard. He considered meeting Richard and talking to him, but he decided it would only worsen his relationship with Judy. Nevertheless, he kept a close eye on his wife. To his knowledge, nothing had happened between them except some light flirting. Judy's decision to send the children to her parents today meant something was about to happen during the long New Year's weekend, and she would likely share it with them. He was prepared for this conversation and kept a recorder ready to understand what she would say. As it started, his tears dried and his heart grew firm. He saw his wife potentially tearing their family apart. His priority was to keep his daughters safe. Hank knew that a conversation was coming today. Kira had already warned him about it. What Judy didn't know was that before the conversation began, Hank went to the bathroom, washed his hands, turned on the recorder, and concealed it in his breast pocket. Then, he returned to the kitchen and sat at the table. Judy remained silent for a minute. Then she looked at Hank, smiled briefly, and her smile disappeared. With a serious tone, she declared, "Hank, there's something you and I need to talk about right now." Her words left no doubt that Hank wouldn't like this conversation. He didn't let it get to him and looked away from his food, asking, "Is something wrong?" "Hank, nothing is wrong. You know I love you. I've loved you and only you for years. You've been an amazing lover, husband, and a great father to our girls. I want to grow old with you and maybe even die on the same day. What's stopping us? I'm a trained sociologist from our university, but only a few of us actually work in that field. Those who do use population surveys and data analysis to understand what's happening in society, identify the causes of negative issues, and offer suggestions for improvement. While I work in marketing, I'm involved in marketing research. Nevertheless, I keep a close eye on all the latest sociological developments. Judy, everything seems a bit unclear and complicated. Can you give me the gist of your question? I've read about what leads to marriage problems and want to reduce the chances of anything going wrong in our relationship. What could go wrong for us? We should be as proactive as possible to avoid common pitfalls that can lead to failed marriages. Judy, it seems like you've been reading some convoluted ideas from someone trying to grab attention. I don't buy into these sociological conclusions at all. Can you tell me what this nonsense is all about? Judy snorted and declared, "Hank, I'm quite serious. I'm concerned about our family. the possibility of us drifting apart. Our actions today might lead to distance between us and eventually end our relationship. So tell me, what should we do? I'm not a sociologist. Maybe we should see a psychologist. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I believe we need a break from our marriage. We should explore our own natures and experiences with other people and places. This way, when we come back together, we'll have a broader perspective to support our relationship. How long should this break last? A month? A year? No, I think a 2-day holiday weekend would suffice. Is that why the kids are going to your mom's instead of the ski resort? We could have sent them to your parents' place, but I already made plans with my mom. So you're telling me that you and your lover concocted this whole sociological theory just to get my consent for a long weekend with your lover? Judy's suggestion left Hank completely stunned. Her bold proposal was shocking, though not entirely surprising given his suspicions. Nevertheless, her words hurt him deeply. Judy, still not sure what you're getting at, Hank asked. Can you clarify? I have no idea who you're talking about as a lover. I know you may not like it, but you'll see that nothing will change between us. I'll make sure you're happy when we reunite. Yes, it's selfish, but I have my reasons. I want to grow old with you. You may not understand that now, but you will, and you'll apologize. You don't even know who the lover is. I'm talking about your new commercial director, Richard. You had a passionate affair with him back in college, and only when he got tired of you did he break it off. After that, you quickly moved on to me. Not a word was said to me about your former classmate becoming your boss. And you're wrong about a lot of other things, too. What am I mistaken about? You're wrong to think that nothing will change. Everything will change, or rather, it has already changed. What has changed? Your attitude toward me and our kids has changed. Everything in our family is changing today. Hank, I love you, and I don't know what you're imagining. I still love you. I don't know how you'll explain our divorce to your parents, or to Alice and Gwen. What will they think? Think of their parents' divorce, Hank. What are you talking about? We're not getting divorced, and our parents don't need to be involved in our personal affairs. Sociology is a precise science, and you don't need to fit our situation into some theory you and your lover came up with. I can see that you're overcomplicating things, so I'll postpone it. You take the girls, come back, and we'll sit down to work things out. Judy, we're not resolving anything. I'm simply leaving. But you can't do this to me. I can, and I will, or I won't do what you suggested. My decision to divorce was spontaneous. I just decided it now, Hank. But I said I was calling it off. Yes, you did, and then you said that when I got back, we'd sit down and talk about it. So you're going to enjoy your free long weekend as I drive the girls around. You can consult with your Richard. Alice came into the kitchen and announced, Daddy, we're ready to go. Girls, I'll be ready in 5 minutes. Hank quickly dressed, grabbed his laptop, slung on his backpack, and without saying goodbye to his wife, headed downstairs. He started the car, waited for it to warm up a bit, and then the girls hopped into the back seat and they drove off. Judy watched them from the window, bewildered. Hank cautiously merged onto the main road. The atmosphere in the car remained silent. Finally, Alice spoke, Daddy, Grandma lives on the other side of the road. I know, dear, but you were promised a ski lodge, and that's where we're going now. We'll figure out where to stay. Dad, are you and Mom getting a divorce? Why would you say that? Dad, we overheard you guys arguing in the kitchen today, and I'm on your side. Aren't you, Gwen? I'm on Dad's side, too. But where are we going to live? Girls, we'll stay at my mom's house. I'll drop you off at school, pick up your books and clothes. For now, let's put all these worries aside and enjoy our vacation. You deserve it. Judy glanced away from the car, took out her phone and dialed Richard, who picked up immediately. Richard, it's Judy. I've got a problem. No worries, I'm alone. Has your husband left yet? He's leaving tonight. He just went to the store. He's probably on his way. What's going on? He didn't react as we expected, or he didn't believe me. Who are you referring to? My husband. I offered him the 2-day separation we talked about, and did he agree? Turns out he's aware of your past and our connection from university. He's talking about getting a divorce. That's not good. It's going to cause a major uproar. It'll reach the office gossip mill, and eventually Kira will hear about it. Kira? I'm not interested in divorcing my wife. You've never been interested, have you? Tell me, so what do I do now? Is your husband back already? No, he still has to drop the girls off at my parents' and then return. I'm sure he'll come home, and he's not leaving. Tell him you've decided there's no temporary separation. I did, he didn't believe me. He thought I'd convince him to go along with it when he got back. When will he be here? I think it'll take him 3 or 4 hours. That's our plan then. Tell him you've made your decision and there's no separation. Right now we need to let his anger subside, and we can't let this reach our workplace under any circumstances. Otherwise, it will complicate things. Judy ended the call, Feeling relieved with Richard's support, she pondered the situation and, recalling the old saying about the way to a man's heart, decided to set up the table and avoid the trouble of cooking. She got dressed and went to a cafe, ordering some takeout. She also brought a bottle of wine and placed a corkscrew beside it. She set out 2 glasses and heated up the appetizers she'd purchased in the microwave. In the living room, she turned on the TV and settled into an armchair. She wondered if her brief affair with an old flame was worth jeopardizing her family. Now, convincing her husband would be incredibly challenging, and she wasn't sure how much he knew about her relationship with Richard. She probably shouldn't have revealed to her husband that her former classmate had become her boss. She knew he'd find out eventually. As it turned out, Hank knew about her involvement with Richard and that he'd left her. It was true. Richard had vanished from her life and then suddenly reappeared. When Judy learned that he would be their commercial director, she felt an unexpected attraction. She realized it was just a fling, nothing more. Their first one-on-one conversation confirmed it. Richard had told her, "Judy, I've always liked you, but I can't risk ruining my family, although I'm not ready to cut off contact with you. It must remain very discreet. You're married too, as far as I know." Life had shown her the folly of her decision. Their discussions in the study had hinted at a scientific foundation, but it appeared they had underestimated something. 4 hours had gone by and Hank hadn't returned. He should have been back by now. Judy called her mom's phone, and though there was a slight delay, her mom answered, "Daughter, I'm here. I just called to check on how you're doing. What's happening?" "It's winter time out there, and the darkness falls early. We're sitting with Grandpa, and we're having a bit of an argument." "What's the argument about?" "Just the usual, the old man's way. He wanted a drink, and I refused, but he found where I hid the bottle." "And you? How are you? When will you bring your granddaughter to visit?" Judy knew from her mom's conversation that Hank hadn't arrived. After the call with her mom, she phoned Hank's parents again, and it was Hank's father, a retired military officer, who picked up. "Judy, is that you? Come on, be honest. I thought I'd call to see how you're doing." "Judy, don't try to deceive me. You're looking for Hank and the kids, right? He warned us about this." "So he was at your place?" "No, he didn't come. He called and said you were getting a divorce." "That's absurd. We had a misunderstanding, but we're not getting a divorce over something like that. I get that it's not just between you two, it's related to some guy from your work." "What did he say?" "He told me that this morning during breakfast you proposed a 2-day separation when he didn't agree. You said you'd cancel it, but discuss it when he returned. Is that what happened?" "No. Hank said he's had enough of discussions and he's decided on a divorce. He's gone to sort it out and won't be back, although he assumed you were still at home waiting for him, ruffling his feathers. But I don't have any dates planned." "Judy, that's not true either. Hank knows about the man you're seeing, and when I suggested he drive up there and figure it out in person, but he said, 'Dad, I'm not interested. I have daughters, and they're on my side.' Where did he go? He didn't tell us. We were so upset that we didn't even ask. If he calls, tell him he misunderstood everything. I did my best for our family, but now I see that I did something wrong. I don't know, my daughter. We've been together with my wife for a century, and even in the toughest times we never thought of separation. Who put these absurd thoughts in your head? And if you love another man, why torment everyone? If you're ready for a lover to run away from your husband and children, just pack your bags and leave. Don't ruin life for yourself and others. Hank will get over it, and maybe he'll be better off. He's not an old or unattractive man, and the girls will be fine with him." "What are you talking about? There will be no divorce." "That's your opinion. I know my son, and you don't seem to know him. I just need to explain everything to him, and he'll realize he was wrong. Whatever, he'll call. I'll tell him." Judy called Richard's phone, and a woman answered unexpectedly. "I'm here. Excuse me, I'm looking for Richard." "Who are you?" "My name is Judy. We work together." "Oh, I know. Let me tell you, honey, I kicked him out. Or don't call him. He doesn't have a phone. Is something wrong?" "You don't know. I've moved to 2 different cities because of this cheater and womanizer, but I'm not leaving this new house. Where's Richard?" "How should I know? I kicked him out. Maybe he's at your place." "He doesn't know where I live. Why would he be at my place? He knows everything, including your address. He's with you at work, but he wasn't the only one involved with you and had plans. He intended to meet all of you while I was on vacation, except I wasn't going anywhere." Hank and his daughters were going to a ski resort out of town. He knew some of the staff there, called one of them on the way. It turned out that Mark, a former classmate of his, went up the mountain and became the director of the base. After explaining the situation to him, Hank asked to accommodate him and the girls for the winter vacation. Mark replied, "Hank, anything for you. A house for 3 people, that's a dream come true. Great, I have a company waiver and 3 cabins available. I'll reserve one for you." "Excellent, but I have a request. If someone calls, don't confirm that I'm with my daughters on this base vacation. All right, I'll reserve the cabin for you. When are you coming? We're about an hour and a half away. I can't drive too fast, the roads are slippery. Okay, I'll set the table in your cabin at the entrance. Just tell them you're here to see Mark and they'll direct you. An hour and a half later, they reached the ski lodge's gates. They informed the gatekeeper that they were there to meet with Mark, who directed them where to go. There was a sheltered parking lot near the lodge, and Hank parked the car there. They took their belongings and entered the house. Mark was waiting at the table. Seeing them arrive, he said, "Hurry up, everything on the table is getting cold. You're always in a rush. Let my girls freshen up, wash their hands, and explore a bit. There are 2 bedrooms upstairs and 1 on the ground floor." Alice and Gwen, taking their things, headed upstairs. They had already changed into their tracksuits and found the room satisfactory. Hank's daughters were growing up and looking good. "Where's Judy? Why hasn't she come?" "That's a separate story, I'll tell you later. Let's toast to our meeting. You're eager, and yet slow." The friends raised their glasses in a toast and reminisced, occasionally interrupted by Hank's daughter's questions. Eventually, Gwen asked Mark about other entertainment options at the ski lodge. "Right now, there's a dance party in the hall. We didn't bring anything for dancing. There's no dress code. You can come as you are, so no specific dress rules. Can we go too? Of course, I'll call one of my staff and they'll take you there." Mark made the call, and a few minutes later, a young employee arrived to escort Alice and Gwen. After they left, Mark asked Hank about his wife. "Decided to get a divorce. Why would you do that?" "Remember when I used to date her? There were rumors that she was seeing someone else." "Yeah, there were rumors, but nothing concrete." "Well, this guy from out of town shows up and he ends up becoming the commercial director at Judy's workplace. They started an emotional affair, which I didn't catch at first. He's got a wife, Kira, who's decided to divorce her husband and spilled the beans to me. And today it all happened." "She cheated on you?" "No, they decided that for the long weekend we shouldn't vacation together, supposedly to strengthen our marriage as we age. I've always been skeptical of sociologists. Sociology is when people who don't understand society conduct research and then try to impose the supposed laws they've discovered, which are often just made up." "You're right about that. Sounds like they made them up for me. So what have you decided?" "When I talked to her, I realized that continuing our life would be unbearable, so I decided on a divorce." "What's next?" "Nothing. I need to figure out how to proceed. A group of lawyers is coming here tomorrow. They have an office downtown. I'll ask them for help." "Come on, pour a drink." Alice and Gwen returned from the dance around 11 p.m. A ski center staff member had been attentive to Mark's guests and escorted the girls back to the lodge. Hank prepared a late supper for the girls, and they shared a meal together before heading to their rooms. Hank sat on his bed, struggling to hold back tears. It had been a challenging day for him, and he couldn't forget everything that Judy had done. He turned on the tape recorder and listened to the recording, reaffirming that his decision was the right one in the current circumstances. Judy had never waited for her husband, and she had no idea where he might have gone with their daughters. But Hank remembered that he had said promises should be kept, and they had promised their children a trip to the ski lodge, so that's where he had gone. And he suspected that reservations had been made in advance. She powered on the computer Hank typically used, but her extensive search yielded nothing. She couldn't find any information about ski lodges in the area he had been researching. The next morning, Hank woke up to a knock on his door. He called out, "Come in," and his daughters rushed into his room full of energy and excitement. "Daddy, wake up. Let's have breakfast and go skiing on the hill. Then we can go ice skating." "There's an ice skating rink here." "Yes, there is. And where do we have breakfast?" "At the cafe. Wash up and I'll be ready in 5 minutes." They headed to the cafe for breakfast. After changing into their skiing attire, they rented skis and took the ski lift up the mountain. They enjoyed skiing until lunchtime. In the afternoon, they returned to the cafe. After changing there, they ran into Mark and his wife. Mark mentioned that the company he had discussed had arrived, including a divorce specialist. "Meet me in my office today. I have a computer and printer, everything you need. I'll take your girls, my wife and her sister to the ice rink tonight, if you don't mind. We'll meet at my place. The girls want to go dancing again. We'll join them, we'll dance, and then return to our cabin. And don't forget, tomorrow is New Year's Eve. We need to prepare for the festivities." Everything was set. After lunch, Fodor and Hank went to Mark's office. A lawyer soon arrived, and they discussed the situation. Maria explained the current legal landscape to Hank, which he was not very familiar with. She advised him against making rash decisions about their apartment, saying, "Keep in mind that your girls will grow up and have their own families. They will need their own space. If you move into the apartment with them now, there might be a new husband in the future, which could complicate matters. But I can't imagine living in the same apartment as her. Try to envision it and consider proposing a partition first. Explain to your wife that you'll be filing for divorce in court. When will the paperwork be ready?
No rush, the courts have their holiday weekends too.
I have my laptop with me. I'll prepare it and we can print it later. Additionally, you can reach out to me at my office or hire me to represent you in court. I like the last option. Hank and his daughters celebrated the new year with Mark, his wife, her sister, and a group of lawyers in the ski lodge's large hall. Other vacationers joined in, and it was a lively night filled with music, fun, and dancing. In the early hours of the morning, Hank returned to the cabin with his daughters, who were exhausted and ready for sleep. Hank rejoined the company, and after the main hall festivities ended, they gathered in his cabin. They sat around the fireplace and later retired to their respective cabins. The following days went as planned with more skiing, ice skating, and dancing in the evenings. Mark asked Hank, "How are you holding up?" Hank replied, "Apart from the daytime fun, there were nights when I shed a lot of tears, but today I feel more prepared for what's ahead than ever." The day came when Hank and his daughters packed up for their return journey. Hank had a conversation with them, emphasizing the importance of not losing their apartment. They made a stop at the mall for groceries and returned home as darkness fell. Alice and Gwen immediately set about rearranging their rooms, with Gwen moving her things to Alice's room. At that moment, Judy entered and asked, "What are you two doing?" "We're turning Gwen's room into Dad's room and we're sharing one room." Judy questioned this decision, and Gwen explained, "That's what Dad said." Judy remained dissatisfied and warned, "I won't tolerate any of your boyfriends in the house. You can hang out anywhere you want, just so you know. I'm filing for divorce." With their room changes complete, the girls got ready for school. Hank started preparing dinner and breakfast for the morning. Judy walked in and tried to initiate a conversation, but Hank remained unresponsive. Judy then entered the girls' room and asked if they wanted to talk to her. The girls expressed that they hadn't missed her, and Hank instructed them to stay out of his way for the rest of the week. Hank, Alice, and Gwen lived separately from Judy, with Hank locking the doors to the rooms they occupied. Hank cooked for himself and his daughters, deliberately ignoring Judy's presence. On Friday evening, a young woman delivered a registered letter with notice to Judy. It was a summons, and attached to it was a statement of claim. After reading the contents, Judy rushed into the kitchen in tears, asking Hank why he wanted a divorce and expressing her hope that things could work out. Hank advised her to consult with a lawyer and discuss the matter with him. Judy mentioned Richard's disappearance, and Hank suggested she reach out to him for advice. Judy insisted that she had no one, but Hank remained unmoved. The girls had already eaten and left for their room without a word to Judy. In her desperation, Judy continued to plead with Hank, declaring her love for him and their daughters. Hank replied, "What does my love have to do with it? I loved you, but that was until I found out you were cheating on me with your old boyfriend, someone you didn't even tell me about. I realized it was foolish to love you. You wanted to talk, okay, go ahead. Tell me about your phony weekend. What did you plan to do? How are you going to spend it? It's been a while since I heard your marvelous sociological theories from your buddy. Enlighten me with your new stories. And how did you spend your weekend? Did you have fun? I thought it was great that your buddy disappeared once more, so let's talk about it." Hank finished dinner and began gathering the dishes in the sink. Hearing the clatter of dishes, Alice came into the kitchen and offered to do the dishes. Hank refused her help and suggested she go upstairs to tidy her room. He assured her that he would do the dishes and take care of ironing her clothes, which were already dry. Judy, feeling entirely ignored during the conversation and sensing that Hank didn't want to engage with her, became emotional and went to her room. In the meantime, Hank promptly washed the dishes, turned off the lights, and headed to his room. He noticed a pile of laundry that he had washed during those days waiting to be ironed. Before going to bed, Hank made his way to the kitchen, where he found Judy sitting in the darkness. Upon seeing him, she said, "Hank, none of this was planned, it just happened. I was seeing Richard at university and then he suddenly disappeared. No, I wasn't pursued or pressured into it. Very few people knew we were dating and hardly anyone knew he broke up with me out of the blue. He appeared at our workplace. We began to interact due to work-related activities, and one day he asked me to have lunch. At first it was just lunch, nothing more. Then something changed. However, he made it clear from the start that there should be no suspicious encounters, and everything had to be carefully planned to avoid our spouses finding out. I reluctantly agreed, thinking it was a fling with no future. This temporary separation was meant to be our first and only date. So, is that why you concocted this story you told me?"
I didn't realize it would go this far, and I agreed to Richard's proposal.
"Hank, can't you see that he was just using you? Can you really be so naive?" "No, it's not that. It's been a while since you've complimented me on my looks, my clothes, or my modern hair, but don't put all of this on me. Just because I haven't been telling you every day how great you look doesn't justify having an affair. Are you saying you're willing to have an affair with anyone who gives you compliments? Over the next few days, Hank prepared for a meeting with child welfare officials. According to his lawyer, Maria, their opinion would carry significant weight in court, although the children's views were also taken into consideration. Hank had a lot to handle in a short time, and at night when he was alone, he found it hard to sleep. His thoughts were consumed by the themes of love and betrayal. The most important person in his life had betrayed him, leaving him with a mix of anger and pain. All he wanted now was a divorce, even though it seemed far from possible. He had lost trust in Judy, and their marriage was beyond repair. He also had to think about the children, who had distanced themselves from their mother. During a conversation, Judy argued that for the sake of the children, they should stay married and try to make their marriage work. Hank's response was, "I believe our children need to know that their parents love them unconditionally. Our daughters are not responsible for what happened. They're old enough to form their own opinions about us, and you need to understand that I haven't spoken ill of you to them. They formed their judgments based on what they overheard when you were criticizing me about our temporary separation for a long weekend." Hank continued, "Judy, I'm proud of our kids. They quickly grasped what was happening between us and your lover. They discussed it among themselves, and I'm sure their decisions were not made lightly. When we left, they were extremely upset with you. Speaking with them changed my plans for the long weekend and the course of my life. The girls know more than you might think." Judy asked, "Do the girls hate me?" Hank replied, "For someone with a degree in sociology, you show surprising understanding. I didn't expect that. Yes, they know their mother was unfaithful, and yes, they are angry with you because of it. You can try to mend your relationship with them, of course, but as a sociologist, you studied the field of psychology related to the study of human behavior patterns and activities. You should remember what adolescence is occurring between the ages of 10, 11, and 15, 16. It's known as a transitional phase where children transition from childlike behavior to more adult-like behavior. They undergo significant physiological changes. It's hard to predict how you'll be able to connect with them. The time leading up to their court appearance was filled with pleas and appeals. Eventually, they faced each other in the courtroom for a preliminary session. They were given some time to try and reconcile their differences. When that period ended, Hank proposed that Judy sign a child custody agreement as part of their divorce. Under this agreement, the girls would live with him. After hearing everything, Judy declared, "I won't sign any agreement." Hank cautioned her, "Then I'll have to bring this matter before the court. The court will hear me, talk to the girls, and make a decision. It's unlikely to be in your favor." Judy responded, "You can't be so sure. Court decisions can be appealed." Hank concluded, "Well, good luck with that." Judy admitted, "Hank, I know I've been foolish. I realize what I was doing was wrong. Please understand, I love you, and I'll never have Richard in my life again. You've decided to replace him with someone else." Hank responded, "Well, that's your personal choice. It's your life. Don't try to blame me. You're a sociologist now. If you'll excuse me, I have a lot on my plate. If you do decide to sign the agreement, it should be done in front of a notary. As a general rule, an agreement to determine child residence does not require mandatory notarization, which holds the power of a court order. However, it is recommended to draft and notarize the document." "Thanks, but she doesn't want to sign anything and I don't need her to. It's just that she won't get anything." Consequently, the court's deadline for the parties to reconcile had expired. Judy made desperate attempts to reconcile with her daughters, but her efforts were unsuccessful. After school, the daughters started their computer science classes, returning home with their father. Following a light snack, usually in their father's room, they settled down to do their homework. Meanwhile, Hank prepared dinner and breakfast for the following morning. On one particular day, the child welfare authorities paid them a visit. They spoke with the girls, examined their room, and compiled a report. Subsequently, they attended the court hearing on time. Hank, accompanied by the girls, addressed some questions with their lawyer. Judy entered the courtroom, took her seat. She didn't have a lawyer but had sought advice from counseling and divorced friends, fully understanding the irreparable state of her marriage. During the trial, she answered the court's questions briefly, with simple yes or no responses. At the end of the trial, Judy declared that she was relinquishing her share of the apartment in favor of her daughters, providing a deed of gift. The judge noted she had already taken her personal belongings from the apartment. What remained would be removed within a week, and she requested a court recess to sign the child support agreement proposed by Hank. After the recess, she added, "I am willing to voluntarily pay child support to Hank because I understand that the court's decision may not be in my favor." Hank responded, "To ensure transparency regarding the money I receive as child support, I propose the defendant open a separate account for each of her daughters and transfer the funds there. I believe they'll need that money when they come of age." The judge heard both parties and clarified that alimony and the division of the apartment weren't part of the initial claim, so the court wouldn't address them. As for the child support agreement and the divorce, these issues would be decided. The court recessed to make a decision. Eventually, Hank and Judy left the courthouse officially divorced. The girls, who had been excused from the courtroom after their hearing, were found sitting on a bench near a bus stop, enjoying ice cream despite the cold. Seeing them, Hank inquired, "Girls, what are you doing? It's freezing outside." The girls explained they had brought the ice cream home and believed it was harmless to have in the winter and could even soothe a sore throat. There was a bit of paradox to it. Hank questioned why 19 was chosen as the age for them to access the money. The girls responded, "That's what we decided." Judy honored her promise and left the apartment. She moved in with her parents, where she cared for her ailing mother. Hank agreed to let her visit her daughters once a week, although Alice and Gwen were hesitant about it. On these visits, Judy spent time with her daughters at their residence. Epilogue. Hank spent a long time on his own. On New Year's Eve, he and his grown daughters vacationed at a ski resort, often in the company of Mark's wife's sister, Katata. They started to develop a relationship, but Hank wasn't in a rush to make any commitments. For him, the most important focus in life remained his daughters, whom he continued to nurture and guide. Katata didn't have any children of her own, but she got along well with Alice and Gwen, although there was some initial jealousy on the part of the girls. Hank treated Judy respectfully, allowing her to visit their daughters and maintaining communication. However, they were no longer a couple or friends. Alice and Gwen matured without causing difficulties. Hank, who surrounded his daughters with love and care, saw the arrival of Katya as something that brought their family closer together. Judy experienced a challenging year. Her parents passed away one after the other. Hank helped her with the funerals, but their shared grief didn't mend their relationship. For a considerable time, Judy lived independently, with her daughters as her primary social circle. Eventually, she began dating a lonely widower from a neighboring house. Richard, her former partner, never reappeared in town. His whereabouts remained unknown, even to his ex-wife Kira, who had remarried soon after their divorce.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
"We need to talk," my wife Chloe shouted as she stormed into the living room, her voice slicing through the air. "We need to talk right now." I looked up at her, managing a faint smile. Honestly, I'd been bracing myself for something like this. I kind of deserved it, maybe. "Well, got anything to say for yourself, Colin?" She practically shrieked when I didn't respond. "Cat got your tongue?" "No, sweetheart," I replied, doing my best to keep calm. "What's going on?" "Oh, you know exactly what's going on. You cheating a hole." Chloe shot back, her eyes blazing. "I just got off the phone with Linda." Well, there it was. Hearing Linda and cheating in the same breath left little to the imagination. Linda was one of her best friends, and like my wife, she was stunning. But with legs that went on forever and a figure that was maybe even a little more tempting. I'd admired her for years, though I'd never imagined actually crossing that line. Until recently. Oh, that was all I managed to say, though it felt ridiculously inadequate given the situation. "So you don't deny that you slept with her, then?" Chloe demanded, her voice icy and sharp. "Would you believe me if I did?" I ventured, without much hope. "Of course I wouldn't believe it, you idiot," she growled back. "So, no point in me denying it," I mumbled, avoiding her gaze. "What did she tell you?" "Everything. She told me everything." "Everything?" I repeated with a strained smile. "Did she mention how many times she screamed my name? How she reacted when I—" "Shut up, Colin," she screeched, her face flushing. "It's bad enough already, and you're going to pay for this? I'm guessing I'm not going to like that, am I?" "Damn right you won't," she continued, her voice trembling with anger. "If you think you can mess around on me, then I can do the same." "What?" I exclaimed, though I couldn't pretend her reaction was unexpected. "You don't mean—" "That's exactly what I mean, you cheating jerk," she cut in. "You slept with another woman, so I'm going to sleep with another man to get back at you. Maybe more than once. Either you accept it, or I'm talking to a divorce lawyer first thing in the morning." "I guess you're not leaving me much choice, sweetheart," I said, acknowledging the corner she had me in. "Damn right I'm not," Chloe replied, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. "All right then, Chloe," I muttered just loud enough for her to hear. "I admit it. You've got me. I'll go with the divorce option." "Well, I'm glad you can see," she started to say, only to stop as my words sank in. "What? What did you just say?" "Divorce," I repeated, more firmly. "I'll go for the divorce option." "But you can't," she replied, her tone suddenly uncertain. "I can," I said, holding her gaze. "But you can't, Colin," Chloe insisted, her voice wavering. "I still love you." "I don't want that." "I still kind of love you too, sweetheart," I said with a hint of sadness. But you gave me a choice, and that's what I've chosen. But you can't, Colin, she repeated, her voice breaking as she fought back tears. I love our life together. I don't want a divorce. I just wanted a little revenge for what you did. And you still can, Chloe, I replied with a wry smile. If we're heading for divorce anyway, why not go ahead and sleep with Tom tonight, like you were planning? What? Tom? How did you? Chloe stammered, shocked and utterly bewildered. Yes, Tom from work, I said, pressing forward. That's who you were planning to get back at me with, wasn't it? Well, she replied hesitantly, her voice shaky. I guess. He might have been the one I had in mind. I certainly hope so, Chloe, I said, wagging my finger at her. I really hope he's the only one you've been seeing behind my back for the past couple of months. A couple of months? Chloe choked, tears springing to her eyes. How could you know? How could I know? I cut in, giving her a look. You started wearing shorter skirts to work, coming home later and later. You went from wanting sex 3 or 4 times a week to barely once in a while. You come home with your shirt barely buttoned, no bra in sight, and I'm supposed to believe you're just having an extra long day at work. Oh, Colin, honey, she began to cry in earnest. It's not what it looks like. We haven't even slept together. I love you. Chloe, I said, keeping my voice steady, I need you to know I put a recorder on the phone. I've listened to your calls with him, so yes, I know you haven't gone all the way. I paused, watching her face fall further, the tears brimming as she realized the full extent of what I'd discovered. And one of the conversations I heard was with Linda, on Tuesday, I continued, watching her wince as I spoke. Smart move, convincing her to seduce me so you'd have an excuse to go after Tom. But here's the thing, Chloe. I saw it coming, but you went through with it, Colin, Chloe said, her voice trembling. Damn right I did. I chuckled. I've always had a thing for Linda, and let me tell you, she didn't disappoint. Who knows? Maybe I'll even have another round with her once all this is over. But doesn't that make us even? She pleaded, her tone edging toward panic. Can't we just drop the talk of divorce? Maybe, I said, stroking my chin as if considering it. But here's the deal. Are you willing to call Tom's wife right now and tell her exactly what you two have been up to? Oh God, Colin. Please don't make me do that, she begged, her face going pale. This time, it's your choice, Chloe, I said, savoring the moment. After a pause, she sighed. All right, I'll do it. And then tell your company, I added. Your boss won't last long once they know he's been having an affair with an employee. You might get fired too, but that's just the price, isn't it? Fine, she whispered, clearly horrified but resigned. She knew the fallout would shatter Tom's life just as much as her own. And about Linda, I said, leaning in, think you could talk her into seducing me again? I don't think she'll agree, Colin, she said, trying to avoid my gaze. Oh, I'm pretty sure she'll agree if you ask her nicely, I said confidently, my grin widening at the memory of that afternoon with Linda. My smile only grew when I saw Chloe nod in reluctant agreement. And I think a threesome would be in order, I added, pushing the boundaries a bit further. And to be clear, I mean with Linda, not Tom. All right, Colin, she replied, desperation clear in her voice. I'll do anything. Anything you want. Just, please don't end our marriage. We'll see. Once you've followed through with everything I've asked, I replied, giving her a hard look. She looked at me, her face etched with worry. What are the chances? She asked softly. I'd say, maybe 50-50, I said with a shrug, leaving her with a glimmer of hope. Colin leaned back, a cold smile spreading across his face as he watched Chloe's hopeful expression, the desperation in her eyes. He let the silence linger, watching her squirm, before finally speaking up. You know, Chloe, he began, his voice dropping its earlier playful tone. I was just kidding about that 50-50 nonsense. I already filed for divorce. Chloe's face drained of color. What do you mean? I mean it's done, he said, his voice hardening. You'll be served the papers soon enough. And honestly, all that talk about doing anything I wanted, it was just me letting you see how pathetic this whole thing has become. But, Colin, she stammered, panic flooding her face, I said I'd do whatever it takes. I'm willing to make it right. I'll call Tom's wife. I'll quit my job. I'll... Save it, Chloe, he interrupted. You already showed me who you are. This marriage is over. You've got tonight to pack your things and leave. She stood frozen, staring at him in disbelief. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm dead serious. You made your choices, and now I'm making mine. So, go ahead, Start packing, he said coldly, glancing at his watch. I expect you out by morning. Colin looked at Chloe, his face hardening as he spoke. You know, Chloe, the truth is that even if you haven't actually slept with him yet, the thought was already there in your mind. And let's be real, it's only a matter of time before it comes back. She opened her mouth to protest, but he held up his hand, silencing her. I can't be your guard, he continued, his voice sharp. I can't spend my life trying to keep stupid ideas out of your head, constantly on the lookout, wondering when you're going to cross the line for real. That's no way to live. But, Colin, I swear, I can change, she said, desperation filling her voice. He shook his head. I've made up my mind. Better to end this now than be on edge for the rest of my life, wondering if or when you'll do this again. Tears welled up in her eyes as she tried to find the words, but Colin wasn't swayed. I'm done, Chloe. I've already filed for divorce. You'll be served the papers soon, so I suggest you start packing your things. He watched her face crumble, but his resolve didn't waver. I want you out by morning. Then, without another word, he turned and left the room, leaving her to face the consequences of her choices. When Chloe was served with divorce papers, her initial shock quickly turned into a desperate fight to salvage the marriage. She pleaded with Colin, promising to change, to do whatever it took to regain his trust. She reached out to family and friends, seeking their support and convincing him to give her a second chance. Chloe even pushed hard for marriage counseling, hoping that a professional could help them work through the betrayal and bring them back to the place they once were. Colin, however, was unmoved. For him, the damage was irreparable. He felt that he could never truly trust her again, and that the thought of staying in the marriage would leave him constantly questioning her actions and motives. Her promises, apologies, and even her tearful pleas left him cold. He had made his decision, and his mind wasn't going to change. Over the next 3 years, the divorce process dragged on, complicated by Chloe's refusal to accept that it was truly over. She contested nearly every detail, hoping that by prolonging the process, Colin might reconsider. She tried to remind him of their shared history, the good times they'd had, and even appealed to his emotions, at one point writing him a long letter outlining everything she loved about him. But Colin's resolve never wavered. Chloe tried counseling on her own, working through her feelings and trying to address the issues that had led her to the brink. She hoped that by becoming a better version of herself, she could win Colin back. In the meantime, Colin maintained his distance, choosing to live his life independently, away from her influence. Finally, after over 3 years of emotional battles, legal standoffs, and futile attempts at reconciliation, the divorce was finalized. Colin walked away, feeling a sense of closure, while Chloe was left to rebuild her life without him. The long fight had worn them both down, but for Colin, it was a necessary step to regain his sense of peace and move forward without looking back. Now let's check the second story. Oh Jesus, Alex. None of us saw that coming. I looked up at Bill, who I'd worked alongside for the past 10 years, desperately fighting back tears. It changes nothing, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though it quivered. It changes absolutely nothing. You sure about that, Alex? He asked, a hint of concern in his voice. I'm sure, I replied, glancing over to the other side of the club where Rebecca, my wife of 9 years, was sitting. I'd always considered myself incredibly lucky to be married to a woman like Rebecca, beautiful, with long blonde hair, a toned body, and curves that never failed to take my breath away. I'd fallen for her hard and fast when we first met, and within 6 months, we were married. Over the years, my love for her only deepened, and I was confident she felt the same way about me. That was, until now. What I'd just witnessed had thrown all that into question. With Bill trailing behind me, I walked over to where Rebecca was sitting, laughing and playfully squirming on some guy's lap as he touched her freely, enjoying every moment of it. That son of a... that betrayal. I started to move toward them, but Bill grabbed my arm, stopping me with a warning that I needed to think twice about my next move, especially considering the 7 huge men sitting at their table. He was right. The 7 men in question were the White Twins and their notorious crew, the most feared and ruthless criminals in South London. They were not the kind of people anyone with any sense would want to provoke. Maybe you should step back, Bill advised, his voice low. This isn't even close to over. As he spoke, 3 more young women approached the group, and the guy who had his hands all over my wife, Rebecca, slapped her sharply on the backside and passed her off to another one of the gangsters. The 3 new women spread out among the rest of the men, and within moments, all 4 women were being kissed and groped by the 7 of them. I felt an icy hand clutch my chest as I watched one of them slip his hand under Rebecca's top. Shit. I wasn't sure how much longer I could take it. She was supposed to be at her sister's tonight. I croaked, my voice breaking. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. Out of all the places we could have picked, it had to be this damn club. People at other tables began to turn and look as two of the thugs started undoing one of the girl's dresses. Before long, a small crowd had gathered, watching the unfolding scene. It was then that I recognized the woman, now in nothing but a bra and panties, as Nancy, Rebecca's sister. So, this was the life they'd been leading for the past year or so, was it? Twice a week, no less. Ever since her sister's husband had divorced her after catching her in bed with two other men. Why hadn't I seen the signs? Why hadn't I suspected anything? Why had I been so naive, giving her so much freedom? I could barely process what I was seeing when Rebecca was lifted up onto the table, encouraged loudly to dance. The man I recognized as Tim White slid his hand under her short skirt, stroking her bare thighs. And did she stop him? Of course not. Rebecca just kept dancing, a sensual smile on her lips as she leaned toward Tim, moving across the table to invite him to touch her more. I was on the edge of losing it. The urge to throw up was overwhelming, but I fought it back, doing my best to keep my stomach in check. Bill, noticing I was about to collapse, grabbed me to steady me. "You had no idea, Alex?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "None at all," I whispered, the truth sinking in like a stone in my gut. A couple of onlookers tried to join in, but they were quickly pushed back and punched in the face. One man, foolish enough to fight back, was dragged off to the back, likely in for a beating. By then, Rebecca and another girl, a slim redhead, had been lifted onto the table together. They started dancing provocatively, laughing and enjoying themselves. Soon, they had undone each other's dresses and were dancing topless, flaunting their bodies to the small crowd, who cheered them on. "Stop, Rebecca," I muttered under my breath. "For God's sake, stop what you're doing." Tim grabbed Rebecca's leg and pulled her toward him, sliding his hand up under her dress. To my shock, Rebecca showed no resistance, laughing as she stepped out of her clothes and kicked them aside. The redhead's dress soon slid down, revealing that she wasn't wearing any underwear. A loud cheer went up from the crowd, and the two girls giggled at the attention. Not wanting to be outdone, Rebecca followed suit, sliding her own dress down until she was just as exposed as her friend. The two of them continued their performance, now fully nude except for their high heels. It was unbearable to watch, and I had to fight the urge to leave, to escape it all. Anything would have been better than staying. Seeing any woman endure such humiliation was difficult enough, but discovering that it was my wife, it was beyond words. "Look, Alex," my friend whispered, discreetly pointing toward the far end of the table. "They're giving that girl something." I followed his gaze and watched in disgust as a young woman, clearly in a vulnerable state, was being fed something by one of the men. It was obvious that they were feeding her some kind of substance, likely fueling a dangerous habit that this group had lured her into. The realization hit me harder than anything, that my wife might have become as caught up in this as the others. It was a crushing thought. What could I do? What did I want to do? What would any man in my position do? Flashes from cameras brought me back to reality. With a heavy sigh, I knew it was time to act. I couldn't just stand there and watch this any longer. "Back me up, Bill," I said, turning to my friend. "It's time to put an end to this." We made our way toward the front. I'm a big guy, and Bill's even bigger, so we had no trouble clearing the path through the onlookers. Eventually, we stood right next to the table, close enough to reach the girls and the men surrounding them. One of the thugs, noticing us, growled, "Keep your distance, a-hole. You can watch, but don't touch. If you do, I'll break your neck." I ignored him and called out to my wife. "Rebecca," I shouted, my voice sharp with disbelief. "What are you doing?" At that moment, Rebecca, along with at least one other girl, was kneeling, and my words seemed to fall on deaf ears. So, I acted. When her back turned to me, I steeled myself and gave her a hard slap on the backside. She screamed in surprise. She screamed, but not as loudly as the man who had been with her. I wasn't sure what he felt, but I imagined he wouldn't be in a rush to experience it again anytime soon. She spun around, ready to yell at me. "You idiot, what are you?" But then she stopped, as if realizing who had slapped her. The look on her face was priceless. Shock, confusion, and shame all mixed together in those brief seconds. Then, chaos erupted. "I warned you, a-hole," the man in front of me shouted, launching himself toward me. But he never got the chance to land the punch. I hadn't mentioned my friend Bill, though. Bill stepped in, catching the guy's punch and quickly neutralizing the threat with one of his own. The crowd, sensing things escalating, quickly scattered, but a few remained, closing in on us. "All right, boss," a voice said from my left.
Let's take them.
Tim and his brothers were furious, pushing the women aside in their rush to confront us. I barely had time to pull out my badge, but I managed to get a few words in. "Tim White," I shouted. "You're under arrest for prostitution, drug trafficking, and—" Before I could finish, he lunged at me, but it didn't help. The plainclothes officers who had been in the crowd with us quickly restrained him. By the time the uniformed police arrived a minute later, the fight had already been subdued, and they quickly handled the rest of the situation. Bill and I stood back, watching as the group of disgruntled people in front of us began to disperse. "Detective Inspector," the uniformed sergeant asked, his tone cautious. "What should we do with the women?" "Take them all in," I said firmly without hesitation. "Book them all." "What for?" he asked, now aware that one of them was my wife. "Prostitution, lewd conduct, anything you can charge them with," I growled. "Throw the book at them." Bill and I stepped back as a line of handcuffed gangsters was escorted to the waiting police vans, with the women trailing behind, looking defeated. As my sister's wife passed by, she spat in my direction. It wasn't a good shot, but then, we'd never really gotten along anyway. "Alex, please, Alex," my wife begged as she was led by. "Please don't let them take me away. None of this is what it looks like." I glanced at her and smiled coldly. She'd somehow been shoved back into a dress that didn't fit her well, revealing more than it should. Her figure was on display in a way that reflected everything I'd come to understand about her. "What was it tonight, honey?" I snarled. "A Tupperware party at your sister's?" "No, Alex," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "Just let them let me go, and I'll explain everything. Tell it to the judge," I responded coldly. Then, turning on my heel, I walked out of the club, Bill following closely behind, and headed back to my empty house. Another dirty job completed. Alex had always been a man driven by justice. As a detective, he was relentless in his pursuit of criminals, especially those like Tim White, a notorious drug dealer whose operation had been running in South London for years. The pressure was mounting on Tim, as Alex's investigation had begun to get dangerously close to uncovering his network. But Tim, ever resourceful, had anticipated the danger and decided to take a more personal route to protect his business. Knowing that Alex had a soft spot for his wife, Rebecca, Tim devised a plan that would cripple Alex's ability to continue his investigation by exploiting the one weakness that could destroy his resolve. Rebecca, a woman who had always been independent and somewhat careless in her choices, became an easy target. It started with Julie, Rebecca's sister. Julie had already been entangled in Tim's world, a consequence of her failed marriage and an escape from her own misery. Julie had become a willing participant in Tim's operations, and it was she who first introduced Rebecca to the dangerous allure of the club where Tim's gang frequented. At first, it seemed innocent enough. A girls' night out, a few drinks, a bit of fun. But once Rebecca was inside that world, it was hard to step back out. Tim knew exactly what he was doing. He lured Rebecca into the club, where she'd find herself surrounded by men whose intimidation was masked by a false sense of luxury and excitement. At first, the drugs were subtle. A pill slipped into a drink, a line of powder passed casually between friends. But it was enough to hook Rebecca, to get her dependent, to take away her willpower and make her complicit in the chaos that was unfolding. Tim's plan was simple but effective. By getting Rebecca addicted to the drugs his gang distributed, he could ensure that she would be too distracted, too consumed by her own needs, to even consider the consequences of her actions. The more dependent she became, the more likely she would be to keep Alex in the dark about what was really happening. And with her own life spiraling, Alex's investigation would be the furthest thing from her mind. As the drugs took hold of her, Rebecca became more and more a part of the world she was supposed to be avoiding. Her behavior grew erratic, her judgment clouded by the substances she was regularly consuming. The more she gave in, the less she cared about her marriage, or the husband who was on the verge of taking down the very men who were controlling her life. Alex, oblivious to the manipulation at first, began to notice the subtle changes in his wife. She became more distant, more unpredictable. He couldn't put his finger on it, but something about her behavior felt off. And when he started to connect the dots between the people she was hanging out with and Tim White's gang, he grew more suspicious, but his focus was diverted by her erratic behavior. The night at the club was the final straw. It was no coincidence that Rebecca was in the same place where Tim's gang operated freely. It wasn't just about getting Rebecca to give in to the lifestyle. It was about humbling Alex, making him powerless. Tim's men had arranged for Rebecca to be humiliated, to be degraded in front of Alex, to make sure that he would never look at her the same way again. It was a calculated move. Strip away Alex's trust in her, break him emotionally, and make him too weak to continue his investigation. And it worked. By the time Alex arrived at the club, his heart was heavy with the weight of what he saw. His wife, who had once been a symbol of his stable life, was now a pawn in a game far more dangerous than he had imagined. His investigation, which had once seemed so close to cracking, was now a distant thought. His focus was consumed by the emotional devastation of witnessing his wife's transformation, and his desire for justice was overshadowed by personal betrayal. As the chaos unfolded, the gangsters and their women became little more than background noise. Rebecca, in her drugged haze, was unable to fight back. The gang knew exactly what they were doing. Tim had succeeded in distracting Alex from the truth, that the real crime was happening under his nose, and now it was too late to stop it. By the time Alex had recovered enough to act, it was already over. The damage was done. Rebecca was in too deep, and Alex was left with a choice. Continue with the investigation and risk losing everything, or turn his back on the case to save the woman who had already been lost to the very criminals he had been trying to take down. Tim had won. Alex was no longer the hunter. He was the prey. The day Alex filed for divorce, it felt like a personal defeat, but he knew it was the only way forward. His mind had been consumed with thoughts of Rebecca's betrayal, her addiction, and the slow unraveling of everything he had worked for. He had watched helplessly as she spiraled deeper into the grip of Tim White's drugs, her body and mind no longer her own. The woman he had loved and trusted, the woman he had built a life with, had become a stranger. He was no longer sure if he was fighting to save her, or if he was fighting for the family he had lost. Rebecca's reaction was predictable. She begged, she pleaded, but Alex's resolve had hardened over the weeks. He had seen the way she had humiliated herself, how she had betrayed their marriage for the allure of the very world he had been fighting to bring down. Her dependency on the drugs, on Tim's manipulation, had robbed her of everything: her dignity, her strength, her integrity. The woman who had once stood beside him had become a hollow shell, and Alex couldn't save her anymore. The divorce proceedings were swift, but emotionally draining. The papers were signed, and the finality of it hit Alex like a physical blow. It was hard to explain, even to himself, how he felt. There was anger, sadness, betrayal, but also a strange sense of relief. Relief that he was no longer caught in the vicious cycle, no longer tethered to someone who had made choices that had destroyed their life together. Rebecca was left to face the consequences of her actions alone. Alex left the house, the home they had built together, and moved into a small apartment in the city. It was a fresh start, or at least that was what he told himself. He buried himself in his work, the investigation he had been so determined to finish before everything fell apart. But his mind often drifted back to Rebecca, to the chaos that had consumed her, and to the unanswered question of what would happen to her now that he was no longer there. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hello, and welcome to Cheating Tales Lab. We're thrilled you could join us. We've got an exciting story to tell, and we hope it brings all the drama you're here for. Let's jump into it. Patrick Elliott sneezed as he shifted another box in his late father's storage unit. Dust billowed, catching the weak light filtering through the windows. He paused, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. His eyes fell on an ornate wooden box tucked away in a shadowy corner. "What's this?" he muttered, reaching for it. His fingers traced the intricate carvings, feeling the weight of history in his hands. The latch clicked open with surprising ease. Inside, a single document lay neatly folded. Patrick's brow furrowed as he unfolded it, squinting in the dim light. His eyes widened, then narrowed as he read. What the hell? It was a will. His will, with his signature clear as day at the bottom. The document declared he'd been dead for 3 months, leaving everything to his wife Christine and a man named Lorenzo McCullough. Patrick's mind raced. How did his signature get there? Who was Lorenzo McCullough? And Christine? His stomach churned at the implications. With shaking hands, he pulled out his phone and carefully photographed the forged will. He replaced it in the box, positioning it exactly as he'd found it. As he locked up the storage unit, his heart pounded so loudly he was sure anyone passing by would hear it. The drive home was a blur. Patrick's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. He pulled into the driveway of their suburban home, its perfectly manicured lawn and cheerful flower beds now seeming like a mockery. He found Christine in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. The harsh fluorescent lights glinted off the knife in her hand. She looked up, a smile on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're home early," she said, her voice light and casual. Patrick's jaw clenched. He pulled out his phone, sliding it across the counter with the photo of the forged will displayed. "Care to explain this, Christine?" Her eyes widened for a moment before narrowing. She set down the knife, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. "It's easier if you don't fight, Patrick. You'll regret everything if you do." "Who's Lorenzo McCullough?" Patrick demanded, his voice low and controlled despite the rage building inside him. Christine's smirk grew. "That's none of your concern." "None of my concern?" Patrick's voice rose. "My name is on a forged will leaving everything I own to you and this man I've never heard of. How is that not my concern?" Christine's demeanor shifted, her hostility becoming more apparent. "Drop it, Patrick. You have no idea what you're getting into." "No, I don't," Patrick agreed, his tone icy. "So why don't you enlighten me?" Christine's eyes flashed dangerously. "You want to play this game? Fine. How about I enlighten your department head about your affair with that graduate student last year?" Patrick's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, don't play dumb," Christine sneered. "I have emails, hotel receipts. It would be such a shame if your perfect reputation was tarnished. I wonder how quickly they'd fire you." Patrick's mind raced. There was no affair, no graduate student, but he realized with growing horror how easily Christine could fabricate evidence, how she could twist innocent interactions into something sinister. "You're bluffing," he said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Christine's smile was predatory. "Are you willing to bet your career on that?" The full weight of her betrayal hit Patrick like a physical blow. This wasn't just about money or a forged will. This was about control, about dismantling his entire life. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Christine shrugged, picking up the knife again. "Because I can. Because you're boring, Patrick. Predictable. I want more, and Lorenzo can give me that." "You won't get away with this," Patrick said. Christine's laugh was cold and mirthless. "I already have. This is your final warning, Patrick. Back off, or I'll destroy everything you've worked for." She stormed out of the kitchen, leaving Patrick alone with the weight of her threats hanging in the air. For a moment, he stood there, stunned. Then, survival instinct kicked in. He knew he couldn't stay in this house, not with Christine, not when she held so many unknown cards. Moving quietly but quickly, Patrick went to their bedroom. He packed a bag with essentials, clothes, toiletries, his passport. In his study, he gathered critical documents, birth certificate, social security card, bank statements. He downloaded financial records and emails from their shared computer, copying them onto a flash drive. As he worked, he called his friend and lawyer, Theodore Myers. The call went to voicemail. "Ted, it's Patrick. I need your help. It's urgent. Call me as soon as you get this." He kept the message vague, aware that Christine might access his phone records. Patrick paused in the study, a thought occurring to him. He set up a hidden camera, positioning it to capture most of the room. If Christine or this Lorenzo character came snooping, he'd have evidence. He heard the shower start upstairs. It was now or never. Patrick slipped out of the house, tossing his packed bag into the trunk of his car. As he pulled out of the driveway, he caught a glimpse of Christine in the upstairs window, wrapped in a towel, her face twisted in fury. He drove, no clear destination in mind, just the burning need to put distance between himself and the life he thought he knew. His mind whirled with plans, with questions, with the beginnings of a strategy to fight back. As the familiar streets of his neighborhood faded in the rearview mirror, Patrick felt a determination settle over him. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a war he intended to win. Patrick pulled into a small, nondescript motel on the outskirts of town. He paid cash for a week's stay, using a false name. The room was dingy and smelled of stale cigarettes, but it would do for now. He sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands, trying to process the events of the day. His phone buzzed, a text from Christine. "Where are you?" He ignored it, instead pulling out his laptop. He needed to start piecing together what was happening. Who was Lorenzo McCullough? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, how was he going to fight back? Patrick opened his email, scanning through months of correspondence. Nothing stood out at first, but then he noticed a pattern. Small discrepancies in their joint account, money moving that he couldn't account for. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Christine. "You're making a mistake, Patrick. Come home and we can talk about this." He scoffed, typing out a reply before thinking better of it and deleting it. No, he wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a response. Not yet. Instead, he called his department head, Dr. Saul Godfrey. "Patrick, is everything all right?" "It's rather late," Saul answered, his voice groggy. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Saul," Patrick said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need to take a leave of absence. Family emergency." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Of course, Patrick. Take all the time you need. Is there anything I can do?" Patrick hesitated. Should he tell Saul about Christine's threats? No, not yet. He needed more information first. "No, thank you. I'll keep you updated." After hanging up, Patrick turned back to his laptop. He started a new document, typing out everything he knew so far. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As the first rays of dawn crept through the motel windows, Patrick finally allowed himself to close his eyes. But sleep didn't come easily. His dreams were filled with shadowy figures and betrayal, Christine's laughter echoing in the background. He woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and with them, a renewed determination. Patrick showered and changed, then headed out. He needed coffee and a plan. As he sat in a small diner, nursing a cup of bitter coffee, he made a list of his next steps. 1. Find out who Lorenzo McCullough is. 2. Gather evidence of the financial discrepancies. 3. Consult with Ted about legal options. 4. Secure his position at the university. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Ted returning his call. "Patrick? What's going on? Your message sounded urgent." Patrick took a deep breath. "Ted, I need your help. It's Christine. She's trying to steal everything from me. There's a forged will, threats to my career. I don't know what to do." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Christ, Patrick. Okay, where are you? We need to talk face to face." Patrick hesitated. Could he trust Ted? He'd known him for years, but then again, he'd thought he knew Christine too. "I'd rather not say right now. Can we meet somewhere neutral? The coffee shop on 5th and Main?" "Sure, Patrick. I'll be there in an hour." As Patrick waited for Ted, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every time the bell above the door jingled, he tensed, half expecting to see Christine or the mysterious Lorenzo walk in. Finally, Ted arrived, looking worried. "Patrick, what the hell is going on?" Patrick took a deep breath and began to explain everything. The forged will, Christine's threats, the mysterious Lorenzo McCullough. Ted listened intently, his frown deepening with each new revelation. "This is serious, Patrick," Ted said when Patrick finished. "We need to move quickly. First things first, we need to secure your assets. I'll file for an emergency injunction to freeze your joint accounts. Then we need to start building a case." Patrick nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time since discovering the will. "What about Christine's threats to my career?" Ted's expression hardened. "Empty threats. We'll deal with them if she actually tries anything. For now, focus on gathering evidence. Document everything. And Patrick, be careful. If Christine is capable of this, there's no telling what else she might do." As they parted ways, Patrick felt a mix of emotions: fear, anger, determination. But most of all, he felt a fierce resolve. Christine and Lorenzo had picked the wrong man to mess with. He would fight back, and he would win. Patrick Elliott pulled into the parking lot of a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. The neon sign flickered weakly, half its letters burned out. He paid cash for a week's stay, using a false name. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation, but it would do. He sat on the edge of the bed, laptop balanced on his knees. Time to start digging. Who the hell was Lorenzo McCullough? A quick search turned up more than Patrick expected. Lorenzo McCullough, charismatic real estate developer. Handsome bastard, too, with a smile that probably made middle-aged housewives swoon. Patrick's jaw clenched as he scrolled through articles and press releases. But there was something off about McCullough's success. Properties that seemed to materialize out of thin air. Deals that closed suspiciously fast. Patrick dug deeper, his archaeologist's instinct for uncovering buried secrets kicking in. It took hours of sifting through public records and newspaper archives, but a pattern emerged. Lorenzo had a type: wealthy women, usually married. He'd sweep in, charm them, and somehow end up with their money. The women were left broke and humiliated. Son of a bitch, Patrick muttered. He pulled up his own bank records next. There it was, a series of large transfers from their joint account to a company he didn't recognize. A quick search confirmed his suspicion. It was one of Lorenzo's shell companies. Patrick's hands shook with rage as he opened his email. He had to know how deep this went. How long had Christine been betraying him? The answer made him sick. Months of correspondence between Christine and Lorenzo, hidden in a secret folder. They discussed their plan in nauseating detail: how to manipulate Patrick, how to siphon off his money, how to leave him with nothing. Patrick slammed the laptop shut, while rising in his throat. He'd been a fool, blind to what was happening right under his nose. But no more. He was going to fight back, and he was going to win. He reached for his phone, dialing Theodore Myers. Ted? It's Patrick. We need to talk. I've found something. Across town, Christine paced in Lorenzo's sleek downtown apartment. He's gone. Packed a bag and disappeared. Lorenzo lounged on the leather sofa, looking unconcerned. Relax, darling. Where's he going to go? Christine glared at him. You don't know Patrick. He's not as stupid as you think. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. Watch your tone. Remember who got you out of that boring life? Christine bit back a retort. She'd made her choice, for better or worse. We need to move faster. Before he figures out what's really going on. Lorenzo stood, pulling her close. Don't worry your pretty little head. I've dealt with his type before. By the time he realizes what's happening, it'll be too late. Patrick met Ted at a quiet coffee shop the next morning. The lawyer listened in growing disbelief as Patrick laid out what he discovered. Jesus, Patrick, this is bigger than I thought. We need to build an airtight case. Patrick nodded. I'm not stopping until I take them both down. What's our next move? Ted leaned in. We need more allies. People who can vouch for your character, protect your interests. Who can we trust? Patrick thought for a moment. Dr. Saul Godfrey, my department head. He's always had my back. And there's a former student of mine, Trevor Joseph. He's a private investigator now. Ted nodded approvingly. Good. I'll start building the legal case. You reach out to them. And Patrick, be careful. These people are dangerous. Patrick's next stop was the university. He found Dr. Godfrey in his office, surrounded by stacks of papers and ancient artifacts. Patrick, come in, come in. How's that family emergency? Patrick closed the door behind him. Saul, I need your help. It's worse than I thought. He laid out the situation. The forged will, Christine's betrayal, Lorenzo's scheme. Saul listened in stunned silence. My God, Patrick, what can I do? I need you to protect my position here. Christine's threatened to ruin my career with false accusations. I can't lose everything I've worked for. Saul's face hardened. Not on my watch. You're one of our best, Patrick. I'll make sure the board knows it. Take whatever time you need to sort this out. Relief washed over Patrick. Thank you, Saul. I won't forget this. His next call was to Trevor Joseph. The young man answered on the second ring. Professor Elliott? This is unexpected. Trevor, I have a job for you. It's complicated, and it's personal. Are you interested? There was a pause on the other end of the line. For you, Professor? Absolutely. What do you need? Patrick explained the situation. Trevor let out a low whistle. That's one hell of a mess, Professor. But don't worry. I'm on it. I'll start digging into Lorenzo's background, see what skeletons I can find. With his team assembled, Patrick felt a surge of hope. He wasn't alone in this fight. His final call was to his sister, Charlotte. She answered with her usual cheerful tone, but it quickly turned to concern as Patrick spoke. "Oh, Pat, I'm so sorry. Of course you can stay with me. As long as you need." Patrick's voice caught. "Thanks, Char. I don't know what I'd do without you." That evening, they gathered at Charlotte's house: Patrick, Ted, Saul, Trevor, and Charlotte. The dining room table was covered in papers, laptops open to various documents. Ted took charge. "All right, let's build this case." "Trevor, what have you found on Lorenzo?" Trevor grinned. "Oh, you're going to love this. Our boy Lorenzo has quite the history. I've uncovered at least 3 other cases of him seducing wealthy women and swindling them. He's good at covering his tracks, but not good enough." Patrick leaned forward. "Can we use this in court?" Ted nodded. "Absolutely. It establishes a pattern of behavior." "What else?" Saul spoke up. "I've secured Patrick's position at the university. Any attempts to discredit him will be met with fierce resistance." Charlotte squeezed Patrick's hand. "And you've got a safe place to stay as long as you need it." Patrick looked around at his allies, feeling a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, all of you. I couldn't do this alone." Ted cleared his throat. "Now, we need to be smart about this. Patrick, you need to lay low. Let us do the legwork. The less Christine and Lorenzo know about what we're doing, the better." Patrick nodded reluctantly. He hated feeling helpless, but he knew Ted was right. As the meeting broke up, Patrick pulled Trevor aside. "There's one more thing. I need you to keep an eye on Lorenzo's office. If you can plant a listening device, even better." Trevor raised an eyebrow. "That's walking a fine legal line, Professor." Patrick's face hardened. "I don't care. I need to know what they're planning." Trevor studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll see what I can do." Days passed. Patrick threw himself into the investigation, poring over financial records and emails. He barely slept, fueled by a burning need for justice. It was nearly midnight when Trevor called. "Professor, I'm outside Lorenzo's office. The cleaning crew just left. If I'm going to plant that bug, now's the time." Patrick's heart raced. "Do it, but be careful." He paced Charlotte's guest room, waiting for Trevor to call back. An hour passed, then 2. Just as he was about to call Trevor, his phone buzzed. "Trevor? What happened?" "Professor, you're not going to believe this. I almost got caught. Lorenzo and Christine showed up just as I was finishing." Patrick's blood ran cold. "Are you all right? Did they see you?" "No, I hid in a supply closet." "But Professor, I overheard them talking. They're planning to have you committed. They're going to claim you're having a mental breakdown." Patrick's mind raced. This was worse than he'd imagined. "Did you get the bug planted?" "Yeah, it's in place. But Professor, there's something else. In my haste to get out, I think I left something behind. A pin. It has the university logo on it." Patrick cursed under his breath. "All right, get out of there. We'll deal with this in the morning." He hung up, his mind whirling. They were trying to have him committed. It was a clever move. If they succeeded, everything he said would be dismissed as the ravings of a madman. He had to move fast. But as he reached for his laptop, a wave of exhaustion hit him. When was the last time he'd slept? He couldn't remember. Patrick sank onto the bed, closing his eyes for just a moment. He'd rest for a few minutes, then get back to work. He woke with a start, sunlight streaming through the windows. His phone was buzzing insistently. "Hello," he answered groggily. "Patrick, it's Ted. We've got a problem. Christine's lawyers have filed a petition for emergency guardianship. They're claiming you're mentally incompetent." Patrick sat up, fully awake now. "On what grounds?" "They're saying you've been exhibiting erratic behavior, making wild accusations. They've got statements from your neighbors about you leaving suddenly in the middle of the night." Patrick's mind raced. "That's when I left after confronting Christine." "Damn it." Ted's voice was grim. "This is serious, Patrick. If they succeed, you'll lose control of everything. Your assets, your decision-making power, everything. What do we do?" "We fight back. Hard. I'm filing counter motions now. We need to show you're of sound mind. That means you need to be visible, Patrick. Go to work. Act normal. Don't give them any ammunition. Patrick nodded, even though Ted couldn't see him. Understood. Thanks, Ted. He hung up. Christine and Lorenzo had underestimated him. They thought he'd run, hide, act irrationally. Instead, he'd face this head-on. As he dressed for work, Patrick caught sight of himself in the mirror. He looked tired, drawn, but his eyes burned with determination. He wasn't going to let them win. Not now, not ever. Patrick Elliott sat in Dr. Saul Godfrey's office, his fingers drumming an impatient rhythm on the armrest. The plan was in motion, but everything hinged on Lorenzo taking the bait. Are you sure this will work? Saul asked, worry lines creasing his forehead. Patrick's jaw clenched. It has to. We're out of options. The phone on Saul's desk rang, making them both jump. Saul answered, his eyes widening as he listened. It's for you, he said, handing the phone to Patrick. It's Lorenzo McCullough. Patrick took a deep breath, steeling himself. Mr. McCullough, what a pleasant surprise. Lorenzo's voice oozed charm. Dr. Elliott, I hope I'm not interrupting. I've got a business proposition I think you'll find very interesting. Patrick's free hand clenched into a fist, but his voice remained steady. I'm all ears. I understand you've made quite the archaeological discovery. I'd love to discuss some development opportunities. Perhaps over dinner? Patrick forced a laugh. Why wait? I'm free now if you are. The faculty lounge is private, and I'm sure you'd appreciate the discretion. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Certainly. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Patrick hung up, meeting Saul's concerned gaze. It's on. You know what to do. Saul nodded, reaching for his phone to set the rest of the plan in motion. 20 minutes later, Patrick sat in the faculty lounge, a hidden microphone taped to his chest. The door opened, and Lorenzo McCullough strode in, all gleaming teeth and expensive suit. Dr. Elliott, a pleasure to finally meet you. Lorenzo's handshake was firm, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Patrick gestured to a chair. Please, sit. I'm curious to hear about these development opportunities. Lorenzo leaned forward, his voice low and conspiratorial. Let's cut to the chase, shall we? I know about the Etruscan artifacts you've uncovered. Priceless, I'm sure. But think of the potential if that land were repurposed. Patrick raised an eyebrow. Repurposed? A luxury resort. Condos. Golf course. The possibilities are endless. Lorenzo's eyes gleamed with greed. Of course, such a project would require creative solutions to certain regulations. Creative solutions? Patrick prompted, his hand casually adjusting his tie, ensuring the microphone picked up every word. Lorenzo chuckled. Come now, Dr. Elliott. We're both men of the world. For the right price, any obstacle can be overcome. Permits expedited, inspections passed, artifacts relocated. Patrick leaned back, his face carefully neutral. And what would my role be in this venture? Your expertise would be invaluable. And of course, your silence. In return, you'd be handsomely compensated. Lorenzo pulled out a piece of paper, sliding it across the table. I've taken the liberty of drafting some preliminary figures. Patrick glanced at the paper, his eyebrows rising at the number of zeros. This is substantial. Lorenzo's smile widened. Consider it a down payment. There's much more where that came from. Patrick stood, pacing the room. It's certainly an intriguing offer, but I have to ask, Mr. McCullough, how can I trust you? After all, I've heard some unsavory rumors about your business practices. Lorenzo's smile faltered for a moment before returning full force. Rumors are just that, Dr. Elliott. Jealous competitors spreading lies. I assure you, my business dealings are entirely above board. Patrick turned, facing Lorenzo. Really? So if I were to look into your past projects, I wouldn't find any irregularities? No swindled investors? No mysteriously vanishing funds? The color drained from Lorenzo's face. What are you implying? Patrick's voice hardened. I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you that I know exactly who you are and what you've done. To those other women. To my wife. To me. Lorenzo stood abruptly, his charm evaporating. You have no proof. Patrick smiled coldly. Don't I? This entire conversation has been recorded, Lorenzo. Your offer to bribe me, your admission of planning to violate regulations. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Lorenzo lunged forward, grabbing Patrick by the shirt. You son of a bitch. I'll destroy you. The door burst open. Ted Myers walked in, followed by 2 police officers. Lorenzo McCullough, you're under arrest for attempted bribery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and a host of other charges we'll be adding as we dig deeper. As the officers handcuffed Lorenzo, Patrick straightened his shirt. Oh, and Lorenzo? You might want to call your lawyer. I have a feeling you're going to need one. Lorenzo snarled as he was led away. This isn't over, Elliot. Patrick watched him go, a satisfaction settling over him. One down, one to go. The next morning, Patrick stood in the police station, watching through a 2-way mirror as detectives interviewed Christine. She sat ramrod straight, her face a mask of indignation. This is ridiculous, she snapped. I don't know anything about forged wills or embezzlement. The detective slid a folder across the table. Then perhaps you can explain these emails between you and Mr. McCullough, or these bank transfers. Christine's composure cracked. I want my lawyer. Patrick turned to Ted, who stood beside him. What now? Ted's smile was predatory. Now, we go for the jugular. I've filed for an emergency divorce and asset freeze. Dr. Godfrey is prepared to make a statement to the board, backing you completely. And Trevor's evidence on Lorenzo's past crimes is damning. Patrick nodded, a weight lifting from his shoulders. Let's finish this. The next few days were a whirlwind. Patrick presented the forged will and financial records to the police, watching as the case against Christine and Lorenzo grew stronger by the hour. Trevor Joseph's investigation had uncovered a trail of victims across 3 states, each with a similar story of seduction and betrayal. Dr. Godfrey stood before the university board, his voice ringing with conviction. Dr. Elliot is not only innocent of any wrongdoing, but he has been the victim of a vicious conspiracy. This university stands behind him completely. Christine and Lorenzo's attempts to fight back crumbled under the weight of evidence. Their lawyers looked increasingly desperate as each new piece of information came to light. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. Patrick straightened his tie as he prepared to take the stand. Ted gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. You've got this, Patrick. Just tell the truth. Patrick nodded, stepping up to the witness stand. As he was sworn in, he caught sight of Christine and Lorenzo, both looking pale and defeated. Dr. Elliot, the prosecutor began. Please tell the court how you discovered the forged will. Patrick took a deep breath and began his story. He spoke of finding the will in his father's storage unit, of confronting Christine, of the threats and manipulation. He detailed the investigation, the evidence they'd uncovered, the elaborate trap they'd set for Lorenzo. As he spoke, Patrick could see the jury's expressions changing from skepticism to outrage. Christine's lawyer attempted to paint Patrick as unstable, but his calm, measured responses undermined their efforts. Dr. Elliot, Christine's lawyer sneered, isn't it true that you've been under immense stress lately? That you've been acting erratically? Patrick's gaze was steady. The only stress I've been under is that caused by discovering my wife's betrayal and the plot to steal everything I've worked for. My actions have been those of a man fighting to uncover the truth and protect himself from those who would destroy him. The lawyer faltered, unable to shake Patrick's composure. As the trial progressed, the prosecution's case seemed insurmountable. Bank records, emails, recorded conversations, the evidence piled up, painting a damning picture of Christine and Lorenzo's scheme. Then came the moment that sealed their fate. Lorenzo, seeing the writing on the wall, turned on Christine. It was all her idea, he shouted, pointing at Christine. She came to me, said she was tired of her boring husband, wanted more excitement, more money. She's the one who forged the will. Christine's face contorted with rage. You lying bastard. You're the one who seduced me, who came up with this whole plan. The courtroom erupted into chaos as Christine and Lorenzo hurled accusations at each other. The judge's gavel banged repeatedly, calling for order. In the end, the jury's deliberation was brief. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. The judge's voice was stern as he delivered the sentence. Christine Elliott and Lorenzo McCullough, your actions show a callous disregard for the law and for basic human decency. You preyed on trust and manipulated emotions for your own gain. I hereby sentence you both to 15 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for 10 years. Patrick watched as Christine and Lorenzo were led away in handcuffs, their faces masks of shock and anger. He felt no satisfaction, no joy, only a profound relief that it was finally over. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for a statement. Patrick stepped up to the microphones, Ted and Dr. Godfrey flanking him. Justice has been served today, Patrick said, his voice steady. But this isn't a victory to celebrate. It's a tragedy, a reminder that trust can be betrayed, that people aren't always what they seem. My hope is that others can learn from this, can be more vigilant, more aware. He paused, looking directly into the cameras. To anyone out there who's been victimized, who's been manipulated or swindled, don't give up. Fight back. The truth will come out. As the reporters shouted questions, Patrick turned away. He caught sight of his sister Charlotte, standing at the edge of the crowd. She gave him a small, proud smile. Patrick walked down the courthouse steps, feeling lighter with each step. The road ahead would be challenging, rebuilding his life, learning to trust again. But he had emerged stronger, wiser, ready to face whatever came next. As he reached the bottom of the steps, Patrick took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. For the first time in months, he felt hope, not just for himself, but for all those who had been victimized by Christine and Lorenzo. Their reign of deception was over. Patrick turned to Ted and Dr. Godfrey. Thank you, both of you. I couldn't have done this without you. Ted clapped him on the shoulder. You did all the hard work, Patrick. We just provided the backup. Dr. Godfrey nodded in agreement. The university is lucky to have you, Patrick. Take some time off, decompress. Your position will be waiting for you when you're ready. Patrick smiled, genuinely this time. I appreciate that, Saul, but I think what I need now is to get back to work. To normalcy. As they walked away from the courthouse, Patrick's phone buzzed. It was a text from Trevor. Drinks to celebrate? First round's on me. Patrick chuckled, typing back a quick reply. Sounds perfect. Meet you in an hour. He pocketed his phone, looking up at the sky. The sun was breaking through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the city. It felt like a sign, a promise of brighter days ahead. Patrick Elliott had faced betrayal, fought back against seemingly insurmountable odds, and emerged victorious. He had reclaimed his life, exposed the truth, and ensured justice was served. The road ahead would be challenging, but Patrick knew he was ready. He had emerged from this ordeal stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. As he walked toward his car, Patrick allowed himself a small smile. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in months, he was looking forward to it.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
John Watson's life wasn't always marked by tension and disillusionment. There was a time when everything seemed full of promise. Growing up in a tough neighborhood, he had to make hard choices to survive. His mother married Tim Murphy, a strict cop who kept John from falling into a life of crime. Though John initially resented Tim, he later realized that Tim's influence steered him toward academic success. He transformed from a rebellious teen into a serious student, eventually discovering a passion for history. John's academic achievements led to a promising career, and he soon met Esther Prynne, a lively law student. They quickly fell in love, moving in together and planning a future. John was sure they were destined for a happy marriage, but the pressures of their careers began to strain their relationship, leading to an unexpected rift. On a gloomy autumn day, the overcast sky matched John Watson's mood. He unfolded his tall frame from the car and headed to the saloon, seeking refuge from the week's stress. A colleague's sudden resignation had left him scrambling for a replacement, with 3 failed interviews only adding to his frustration. Students were also upset over delayed textbooks, but what weighed most heavily on him was the growing tension in his marriage. "Hi, Professor. Haven't seen you in a while." Chester, the bartender, greeted him quietly. "Hi, Chester. I'll have a scotch and water," John replied, noting it was just after 4 p.m. As he waited, John's eyes wandered around the familiar old saloon, a place that had been his retreat since graduate school. His mind drifted back to when he was finishing his doctorate in American history. His manuscript on Henry Clay was set to be published, and he had just been offered a teaching position. Though the pay was modest, he couldn't have been happier. Esther had graduated law school and secured a job with a prestigious firm, and they had been living together for a year. John had saved up to buy an engagement ring, and Esther's joy when he proposed had filled him with pride. They were set to marry in the spring. John's thoughts turned to a younger, vibrant Esther. Her zest for life made her seem taller than her 5'4" frame, with her long blonde hair and sparkling blue eyes. He recalled how deeply they had loved each other. But the somber mood returned as he remembered the New Year's Eve party at Esther's law firm, shortly after their engagement. He never felt at ease with her colleagues, sensing their contempt for his career choice, which only fueled tensions between him and Esther. By 11 that night, the party had descended into chaos, with drunken antics that made John uncomfortable. He had always been careful not to drink too much, determined not to follow in his father's footsteps, a man who had died in a drunken crash, leaving John's mother to fend for them in poverty. Reflecting on his past, John recalled the mean streets of his youth, where he had roamed with a gang until Tim Murphy came into his life. As a cop, Tim put an end to John's wild ways, showing him that the path he was on led only to misery. John wasn't foolish, and his transition from gang member to honor student happened quickly. Within a few months, he buckled down and started enjoying school for the first time. During this time, he also vowed never to let booze control his life, determined not to become like his father. This resolve was why he felt so uncomfortable at that party, where almost no one, including Esther, was sober. Esther, usually a light drinker, teased him for being a buzzkill and urged him to relax. She was clearly tipsy, and John tried to convince her to leave. She snapped at him, insisting it wasn't even midnight yet and she wanted to stay. John reluctantly waited, avoiding the drunken crowd. As midnight approached, he searched for Esther and finally found her in a passionate embrace with James Moriarty, another young lawyer. Their kiss was far from innocent, and John, pale and trembling, stormed over and pulled her away. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Did you forget you're engaged?" he hissed. Moriarty made the mistake of shoving John, who quickly knocked him to the floor. Esther, furious and red-faced, slapped John hard, drawing the room's attention. In the stunned silence, John calmly removed the engagement ring from her finger, dropped it, and ground it under his heel. Without another word, he walked out, shaking with anger and humiliation. As he reached his car, he forced himself to calm down, though his thoughts were far from rational. All he wanted was to get back to their apartment, pack his things, and leave as quickly as possible. Esther had crossed a line, and John didn't care that she was drunk. His anger left no room for forgiveness. Back at the apartment, John quickly packed his belongings, filling 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. Looking around, he felt a wave of sadness at how little he had to show for their time together. He knew this wasn't just a minor argument. It struck at the core of their relationship, which he now believed was likely over. He doubted he could trust Esther again, either with his fidelity or his dignity. If she wanted to play around, she could do it without him. John soon checked into a Holiday Inn near campus and began planning his next steps. He knew there were rooms available for unmarried faculty at the university, and he intended to lease one. The next day, he realized he had a lot to think about regarding Esther, but he suspected they were done. He also knew he was too angry and embarrassed to think clearly, so distancing himself for a while seemed necessary. In the days that followed, John buried himself in work, ignoring Esther's calls and tearing up her messages. He wasn't ready to face her or risk another confrontation. Despite his anger, he missed her terribly, and wondered if he was overreacting to what might have been just a drunken mistake, though deep down he doubted that explanation. 2 weeks after the party, John reluctantly agreed to have lunch with Art Doyle at the Fairmont Country Club. Doyle had called and insisted on meeting, and John suspected the reason, but kept an open mind. Entering the sunlit dining room, John spotted Doyle seated by the windows and approached the table. Doyle greeted him warmly, extending his hand. "Hello, John. Thanks for coming," Art said with a smile. "Thanks, Mr. Doyle. Nice to see you again," John replied, though his enthusiasm was muted. Doyle smiled gently. "John, please call me Art. I've asked you before. I hope you can consider me a friend." "Of course, Art. I have a lot of respect for you and appreciate the kindness you've shown me," John said as they sat down. They made small talk over lunch until the table was cleared and coffee was served. Doyle looked at John with genuine affection. "John, I'm sure you know why I invited you to lunch. Besides enjoying your company, the main reason is—" "Esther, please, just hear me out for a few moments, okay?" John sighed and nodded, knowing this conversation was inevitable, and even welcoming it. He hoped Art could help mend the rift between him and Esther. Art smiled as he began. "John, first, I want to apologize on behalf of the firm. The party got out of hand, and it shouldn't have. Everyone was reprimanded afterward. As for Moriarty, he's been transferred to another city. It turns out his plan to seduce Esther wasn't a secret, and he's gone now. Firing him would have been messier." John raised an eyebrow. "Plan of seduction? So this wasn't just a one-time thing?" he wondered, thinking about what else Esther might have kept from him. Art, sensing John's thoughts, quickly reassured him. "John, I looked into it, and nothing happened beyond what you saw on New Year's Eve. Esther is a mess right now, and I don't want this to ruin a good relationship. It's clear you both still love each other. It's time to talk and sort this out." John knew Art was right. "I think I'm ready to have a rational conversation with Esther. I'll call her and set something up." Art grinned. "No need, John. Esther's expecting you at the apartment for dinner tonight. Don't worry, I knew you'd come around." John smiled wryly. "Fine, Art. I'll be there, but not for dinner. I'll come around 8, and we can talk over coffee. And thanks, Art. I needed the push." That evening, John and Esther talked for nearly 2 hours. Esther, nervous and agitated, struggled to start. John waited patiently, knowing that if they were to move forward, they needed to be honest with each other. He wasn't going to make it easy. Esther had caused this crisis, and it was up to her to begin fixing it. Finally, Esther looked up, tears in her eyes. "John, I owe you an apology. I don't know why I kissed him like that. I guess it was the drinks. I'm ashamed and hope you can forgive me." John sighed, looking at her calmly. "I understand, but that doesn't lessen the hurt. You sided with someone else instead of me, and that was humiliating. If this is what I have to expect, I'm not sure we should continue." Esther, pale, shook her head. "No, John, please, I love you. Don't let one stupid mistake ruin what we have." "Esther," John replied softly, "we need to be clear about what we expect from each other if we're going to be married. We have to agree on what honor, love, and fidelity mean." In the end, Esther apologized again and promised never to drink to excess. John also apologized for his temper, though he didn't feel his reaction was out of line. They discussed their expectations around fidelity, loyalty, and trust. The next day, John moved back into the apartment, and over time, things returned to normal. Interestingly, John never bought another engagement ring, and Esther never asked for one. They married in the spring, as planned, and had a good marriage. Their love was tested when they discovered John was sterile, but they decided to accept it and focused on their relationship and work. John blinked, realizing he'd been daydreaming. Relieved to see not much time had passed, he noticed his drink was empty and motioned to Chester for another. As he sipped his drink, he thought of Art Doyle with deep affection, feeling a lingering sadness at his recent passing. John had really only formed close friendships with 2 people at the law firm: Art Doyle and Lee Lestrade, a younger partner. Lee joined the firm about 10 years ago and quickly connected with John, starting at one of the company's gatherings. Lee was impressed by John's position as a professor, as Lee himself had always harbored a secret desire to teach. John was glad Lee was still around, but thoughts of his wife Esther darkened his mood. Their 20th anniversary was approaching, but the strain in their relationship made it hard for him to look forward to the milestone. Over nearly 2 decades, their marriage had deteriorated slowly and subtly, and John only recently realized how bad things had gotten. The lack of affection, growing indifference, and even disrespect had become all too apparent, with small spats and a lack of physical closeness now the norm. John was unsure how to address the issues with Esther. He dreaded the thought of another argument, as Esther's sharp tongue had become more frequent. "Has it really gotten so bad that I can't even talk to her?" he wondered. John was startled by a voice at his ear. "Hey, buddy, buy a girl a drink." It was Irene, prompting a small smile from him. "Renee!" he exclaimed. "What are you doing here? You're the last person I expected to see." "I stop by every few weeks, John, for old time's sake. Order me a gin and tonic. I'll be right back," she said, heading to the restroom. John smiled affectionately after her. Dr. Irene Adler, an attractive woman in her late 30s, was more than just good-looking. Tall and confident, with dark hair and striking eyes, she was now the assistant chair of the Drama and Performing Arts Department. John and Esther had supported her through 2 divorces and numerous failed relationships, and John considered her his closest friend. When Irene returned, she sat next to John and said, "Okay, Johnny, what's the problem?" "Why do you think there's a problem? And don't give me that nonsense about stopping by here regularly," John replied without much bite. Irene laughed. "I saw your car outside as I was driving by and decided to check if it was really you in here." John gazed at her with genuine affection. He trusted her completely, which made it easy for him to open up. He poured out his frustration and confusion about his marriage, and Irene listened, feeling sorrow for her friend's pain. She hadn't realized how much he was hurting and was shocked to discover the rift between him and Esther. "John, something must have caused this," Irene interrupted. "What you're describing sounds like a buildup of small issues, but there's got to be a deeper reason. Have either of you done something that really upset the other? I can't believe you both just drifted into this state. There has to be a cause." John shook his head. "I don't know, Renee. I can't pinpoint anything specific. It feels like we just drifted into this mess and I don't know how to fix it." "How about talking to her, John? Just sit down and talk," Irene suggested gently. "We've tried, but it always turns into a fight. She accuses me of being paranoid and I lose patience. It's just not working," John replied, his voice fading. Meanwhile, across town, Esther Watson leaned back in her office chair, staring at the tall blonde man across from her. She didn't hide her appraisal of Jim Moriarty, who had been trying to seduce her for months. Though she found him attractive, she knew he wasn't worth risking her marriage over, even if her marriage seemed to be crumbling. "Jim," she said, "you've been back for over 6 months and you haven't changed. You're still a relentless womanizer. Why not get married again and stop hunting?" "Come on, Essie," Jim chuckled. "I'm just being friendly. You're a beautiful woman, and any man would want to be with you. Your husband is an idiot, more interested in his books than in you, and you know I'm right. You want me? I can see it in your eyes. And it will happen, Esther. It will happen." Esther bit her lip and looked away. Moriarty's comments struck closer to home than she wanted to admit. She was fully aware of the growing distance between her and John. Their relationship had cooled, and John's occasional jabs about lawyers didn't help. She often found herself snapping back, criticizing his profession in return. What used to be harmless teasing had now turned into something more hurtful. "Maybe I should have told John about Jim being transferred back," she thought. "But I was afraid of his reaction. I hope not telling him wasn't a mistake." Turning her attention back to Moriarty, she said, "Jim, let's not go there. My home life is off limits. Leave it alone." Moriarty just smiled. "Okay, but remember, I'm always here for you. You've got a friend in me." "Yeah, a real friend," Esther replied with a grimace. "I know what you're after, Jim. Go chase someone else, but keep it out of the office. Now let's get back to work on the Simmons contract." Moriarty laughed, leaned over and brushed her lips with his before she could react. Then he walked out, humming. Esther sat for a moment, breathing heavily, ashamed to admit that his gesture had affected her. She touched her lips, feeling a thrill she hadn't felt in a long time with John. Is this where all this flirting is leading? She wondered, but she quickly shook off the thought. Her phone rang and she answered it with impatience. It was Stan Hopkins. "Yes? Are you finishing the Simmons contract?" he asked. "Yes, Stan. We've been at it for months." "Why? Is there a problem?" "Not really, but you'll need to fly up to see him on Monday. He can't make it here and he wants it finalized then." "Damn it, Stan," Esther protested. "It's Friday and we'll have to work all weekend to meet that deadline. I've only had Jim helping me on this." Stan sighed. "I know, Essie. I'll get you more help tomorrow, but you'll likely have to work late. Get some rest tonight and we'll start early tomorrow." Esther ended the call with a half-hearted, "Okay." She knew this would likely cause another argument with John, who had been complaining about her workload. She feared this might be the final straw, but promised herself that once this project was done, they would focus on their marriage, maybe even take a vacation. She recognized that she had been short and impatient with John lately, and vowed to change once the project was over. Meanwhile, in his office, James Moriarty leaned back, smiling grimly. He knew Esther was vulnerable, and was confident that he could eventually win her over. He hadn't forgotten the New Year's Eve confrontation with John, which had led to his transfer and stalled career. Now he was back, and his plan for revenge was to make Esther his. The weather had turned cooler, and John was eager to get home. He was disappointed to find the house dark as he pulled into the driveway. Crap, he muttered, assuming Esther was working late again. But just then, Esther's car pulled up beside his. Surprised, he waited by the door. "Hi, sweetie," she said cheerfully. "We made it home at the same time. How about we freshen up and go out for a nice dinner?" John was wary. Esther's sudden cheerfulness seemed out of place. Something's up, he thought, but decided to play along to see what she had in mind. Despite his doubts, they had a lovely dinner and a warm conversation, which gave John hope. Perhaps they could rekindle what they had lost over the years. For the first time in a long while, John really looked at Esther, appreciating her beauty and sensuality, even after 40 years. He realized he might have been neglecting her, too focused on his career, and resolved to make more of an effort to strengthen their marriage. Esther, too, felt encouraged as she noticed John opening up. She saw the desire in his eyes and felt a surge of affection for him. She vowed to work on their relationship, hoping to get through the Simmons project soon so she could focus on her marriage. As they drove home, Esther cuddled into John's arm, and soon they were home, sharing a glass of wine by the fire with soft music playing in the background. Esther knew she needed to tell John about working tomorrow and the out-of-town trip on Monday. She bit her lip, dreading the conversation, and debated whether to wait until the last minute. But she realized that would only make him angrier, so she decided to face it now, even though she knew it wouldn't be easy. "Honey, I have good news," she began. "The Simmons project is almost done, and we can get back to normal soon. I have to work tomorrow to finish the final draft, and then we'll fly out Monday to wrap things up." "I don't need to hear any more," John interrupted sharply. "It's clear your career is more important to you than our marriage. I've heard it all before." He turned to leave, but before heading upstairs, he paused. "Think about what you really want, Essie. I'll do the same." He then went to the guest room, where he undressed and lay in bed, unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling most of the night. The next morning, Esther was up early. She quickly dressed and left without breakfast, still angry about John's harsh words. She knew their marriage was on shaky ground, but pushed those thoughts aside to focus on work. John woke up late, feeling exhausted. He went through his morning routine and noticed that Esther hadn't even made coffee before leaving. He sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, regretting how he had snapped at her. He knew he had been short-tempered for months, but couldn't pinpoint why. Their once loving relationship had turned into constant conflict, and he was determined to fight for their marriage. Remembering their pleasant dinner the night before, John smiled slightly, realizing he still loved Esther. He regretted his outburst and decided to surprise her at work, hoping to take her out for lunch. He knew he needed to be more supportive and planned to show her that he was committed to improving their marriage. As he drove to Esther's office, he felt optimistic, but then his car got a flat tire. Frustrated, he pulled into a nearby diner parking lot and called for roadside assistance, which would take 30 minutes to an hour. Deciding to eat while he waited, he entered the diner and spotted Lee Lestrade, a senior partner at Esther's firm, sitting alone. "John, what a surprise! Join me," Lee said, waving him over. John smiled and sat down. "Nice to see you, Lee. What brings you here on a Saturday?" "Emily's out of town visiting a friend, so I'm on my own. I stopped by the office for a file and decided to grab a bite here. What about you?" "I was on my way to see if Esther wanted lunch, but I got a flat tire. So much for my plans," John chuckled. "Buck up, John. The project Esther and Jim are working on will be done in a few days. We can all celebrate when they're back." "Jim?" John asked, surprised. I don't recall Esther mentioning him. Jim Moriarty. He was transferred to the main office about 6 months ago. I'm surprised Esther didn't mention him. They've been working together on this project for a while, Lee explained, not noticing the color drain from John's face. John felt his throat tighten and his stomach churn. A red haze clouded his vision, but he managed to keep control. "I guess I haven't been paying attention, Lee. Sometimes it feels like Esther and I live in two different worlds." He forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, we're all guilty of that sometimes," Lee laughed. It took every bit of John's self-control to stay in that booth, eat his sandwich, and continue talking with Lee. His mind was racing, but he forced himself to stay calm. His heart pounded, and sweat trickled down his sides. When the auto service truck finally arrived, he quickly excused himself. John drove home on autopilot, realizing when he arrived that he couldn't remember the trip. He took a deep breath, stumbled into the house, and sat down, feeling empty and lost. His thoughts were chaotic and he couldn't focus. His mind screamed, "Esther is having an affair!" He fought against the idea, but it kept coming back, leaving him trembling and in pain. He poured himself a drink, but then poured it out, refusing to follow in his father's footsteps. John went to the bathroom, considered taking some of Esther's Xanax, but decided against it. He smiled bitterly at the thought. Gradually, the shock wore off and his mind began to clear, though still erratically. So Jim Moriarty is back, he thought. And she didn't tell me. No wonder our marriage has been falling apart. He knew he couldn't stay married to a cheater. The word divorce loomed large in his mind, and he realized that counseling was no longer an option. It was too late. As the initial sorrow faded, John felt an icy calm replace it. The boy who had survived the streets took control. He would not be a sufferer. But before taking action, he needed proof. He needed to be sure of Esther's infidelity before he could confront her. A grim smile crossed his lips. "There's a price for cheating," he muttered as he picked up the phone, unaware of the tears streaming down his face. Meanwhile, at the office, Stan Hopkins called out to Esther. "I'm heading out. Are you guys almost done?" "A couple more hours, Stan," she replied. "Jim is finishing up the first draft, and I'm nearly done here." "Don't forget your flight tomorrow evening. Get some rest before your meeting with Simmons," Stan said as he left. Esther sighed, knowing this would likely cause another argument with John. She wondered if they could ever get back to the love they once had. Spending a couple of nights away with Jim, even in separate rooms, could be disastrous if John found out. She worried that not telling him about Jim's return was a serious mistake. "I've done nothing wrong and intend to keep it that way," she thought, but anxiety lingered. Later, Irene greeted John at her door. "Come in, John. You didn't sound like yourself on the phone. Do you want a drink?" "Nothing, Irene," John replied. "Thanks for letting me come over. I really need to talk." Noticing his drawn features and red eyes, Irene knew something was very wrong. She led him to the living room where he sat down, trying to smile. "I'm sorry for bringing my problems to you, Renee. You're always there to share them," he said, attempting a chuckle. Irene waited, inviting his confidence. John began to share his suspicion that Esther was having an affair. "It all makes sense now, Renee. Why our marriage has deteriorated. Her coldness, the lack of affection, the disrespect." His voice rose before he regained control. "I don't even remember the last time we really made love or even kissed. Can you believe that?" Tears welled in his eyes as he spoke. Irene felt deep sympathy for John and Esther. Despite what John had shared, she found it hard to believe Esther would cheat, knowing how much she loved him. "John," Irene said gently, "I know learning about Moriarty's return has shaken you, but think this through. Maybe Essie didn't mention it because she knew you'd react badly. Couldn't that be the reason?" John shook his head. "I've considered that, but it doesn't explain everything. His return coincided with our problems, and that's too much of a coincidence. I never doubted her before, even with the late nights and weekends. But now, it's clear, Esther is having an affair with Moriarty. I can't accept that. Our marriage is over. I just need to get the proof before I file for divorce." Irene gasped. "Divorce? John, aren't you jumping to conclusions? You only have suspicions. Talk to Essie first. You know she can't lie to you." "She's been lying to me for months, Irene. I need proof. Can you help me disguise myself so I can follow them and catch her in the act?" Irene laughed despite the tension. "John, you don't need makeup. Just change your appearance a bit. Wear a baseball cap, some glasses, and casual clothes. That'll be enough." John nodded. "Good idea. I'll fly out after she does and see what I find. At least I'll be doing something." As John left, Irene hugged him and asked to be kept informed. After he left, she stood in the doorway, thinking deeply, her heart heavy for her friend. A stray thought crossed her mind. If John divorces Esther, he'll be available. She quickly dismissed it, scolding herself for even thinking it. But the idea lingered. John returned home late, having walked for miles to clear his mind. Exhausted and emotionally drained, he entered the dark house and collapsed into bed without undressing. Despite his turmoil, he fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next day was tense at the Watson household. John and Esther avoided each other, and when the taxi arrived, Esther left without a word. John watched her leave, considering whether his trip the next day was even necessary, but he decided he needed proof, if only for closure. The following morning, a very different-looking John Watson checked into a hotel. Wearing a Phillies cap, horn-rimmed glasses, and casual clothes, he looked nothing like his usual self. Convinced he wouldn't be recognized, he chose a spot in the lobby where he could watch the elevators discreetly. Before heading to his room, John noticed a hotel flower shop. He ordered a dozen roses to be delivered to Esther's room, then positioned himself in the lobby. Soon he saw a bellman carrying the flowers to the elevator. John followed him, noting the room number, 1212. before quickly retreating to avoid being seen. He then returned to his own room on the 9th floor, determined to get the evidence he needed. John took his seat in the lobby around 4 o'clock, pretending to read a newspaper but mostly watching the clock as time crawled by. Finally, at 6:33, he saw Esther enter the lobby with James Moriarty. Despite the years since he'd last seen him, John recognized him instantly. They both looked frustrated, as if their negotiations had gone poorly. Moriarty tried to guide Esther into the dining room, but she pulled away and headed for the elevators, with Moriarty following. After a quick meal in the hotel coffee shop, John returned to his spot in the lobby, pretending to be engrossed in his newspaper. He stayed there until after 11 o'clock, then headed to his room, deep in thought. Maybe I'm being paranoid, he wondered. Their interactions seemed purely professional, no affection, no signs of an affair. But doubts lingered as he prepared for bed. He knew he needed to discuss his concerns with Esther calmly and rationally, without letting it turn into another argument. If they couldn't resolve their issues, they might have to face the end of their marriage. The next morning, John woke late, feeling exhausted despite the sleep. After a quick shower and a light breakfast, he reconsidered his suspicions. Maybe I jumped to conclusions, he thought. He decided to continue his vigil in the lobby for the next 2 nights, though he was starting to doubt anything incriminating would happen. That evening, John was back in his chair in the lobby, anxiously watching the clock. At 7:14, he saw Esther and Moriarty enter the lobby, laughing and holding each other. Moriarty had his arm around Esther's shoulder, and they were clearly enjoying themselves. They headed into the hotel dining room, out of John's sight. Esther was thrilled. They had finally secured Simmons's signature on the contract, and she knew this success could lead to a partnership at the firm. Despite Jim's reputation, she felt grateful for his help. As they celebrated with dinner and wine, Esther's spirits soared, and she agreed to join Jim for a drink in the lounge after changing out of her suit. John watched anxiously as Esther went to the elevators, and Moriarty headed to the lounge. He decided to follow Moriarty and have a drink himself to relieve his tension. Sitting at the far end of the bar, he discreetly watched Moriarty through the bar's mirrored backdrop. He noticed Moriarty sitting alone in a corner booth, nursing a drink. As John sipped his scotch, he began to feel more confident that his fears were unfounded and mentally prepared an apology to Esther. But he kept a close eye on Moriarty, puzzled by his solitary behavior in the nearly empty lounge. John glanced at his watch. It was almost 9:30. He started to leave when his stomach clenched. Esther walked into the lounge, wearing a white silk blouse, a tight black skirt, and a string of pearls John had given her for her 40th birthday. He watched in the mirror as she unsteadily approached Moriarty, who stood to greet her, took her hand, and slid into the booth beside her. From his distance, John couldn't hear their conversation, but the scene spoke volumes. Moriarty ordered drinks, and as they chatted, John saw his wife smiling, laughing, and glowing. Moriarty stroked her hand and touched her arm, and John's anger burned hotter. The sight confirmed what he had dreaded. His marriage was over. But John wasn't going to let this go quietly. He watched grimly as Moriarty whispered in Esther's ear, making her giggle. With the wine from dinner and more drinks, Esther was clearly intoxicated. She didn't resist when Moriarty ordered another round, and she quickly drained her glass. Feeling warm and euphoric, she didn't stop Moriarty when he kissed her. At first, she tried to push him away, but soon she was pulling him closer, their kiss deepening. Suddenly, John's voice cut through the moment. "I'm sure you won't mind if I join you. I should applaud, but I won't," he said, sliding into the booth opposite them. Esther, confused, gasped when she realized her husband was sitting across from her. Moriarty fumbled to fix his clothes and tried to leave, but John stopped him with a venomous whisper. "You move, and I'll rip your face off." Moriarty, remembering their previous encounter, decided not to challenge John and remained seated, looking frightened. Esther, now sober, was chilled by John's icy demeanor and the contempt in his eyes. "Tell me about my paranoia, Essie," John said coldly. "Tell me how unreasonable I am, how I should be more understanding." Turning to Moriarty, who was squirming, John continued, "I should thank you for pulling your hand out when I arrived. I'm not sure my wife would have thought to do that." Esther, now in tears, felt nauseous and lightheaded. The man before her was unrecognizable, not because of his clothes, but because of the hatred in his eyes. John's voice dripped with sarcasm as he said, "I should apologize for interrupting. I should have let you continue. You were so engrossed. How long have you been screwing him, honey? How did it feel making me a cuckoo?" John's rage was barely contained. Moriarty tried to speak, but John cut him off. Get out, you creep. But remember, one day I'll find you and I'll eliminate you. It may not be tomorrow or next week, but one day. Moriarty didn't wait for a second warning and nearly ran out of the lounge. John chuckled grimly as he watched him leave, then turned back to Esther, who stared at him in horror. She had never heard such venom in his voice. John looked at her disheveled clothes, bile rising in his throat, and wondered what had gone so wrong between them. Was it him? Was he that bad of a husband? Or was it Esther who was so dissatisfied with him and his profession? John suddenly realized he didn't care about the reasons anymore. His thoughts were interrupted by Esther's tearful voice. "John, please. I let things go too far. I was just so happy about the Simmons contract. Please forgive me. I'm so sorry," she sobbed. John stared at her. "Shut up, Esther. I don't want to hear any more lies or excuses," he muttered wearily. He then revealed her underwear, a twisted piece of red nylon and lace. "I gave these to you for your birthday. You said scarlet was your favorite color. You saved them for a special occasion, but not for me. You wore them today for him." His voice turned bitter. "Stay here with Moriarty. Don't come home until I'm gone. I'm filing for divorce." Esther gasped, turning pale. "We'll split everything, but you can have the house. I'll take my clothes and research materials. Don't fight it, Essie, or I'll testify about tonight and ruin your career. And his." John pocketed her undergarments, stood up, and walked away, leaving Esther sobbing. 3 months later, John had moved out and filed for divorce, but Esther was fighting it. Despite his threat to expose her affair, John found he couldn't bring himself to do it. He realized he didn't want to publicly humiliate her or himself. His attorney, Sherwood Holmes, informed him that Esther wanted a private conversation before she would agree to the divorce. Holmes advised John to talk to her to avoid dragging the process out and costing him more money. John, sitting in Holmes's office, gazed out the window, then snapped, "Screw her. Let her fight the divorce. I don't care." Holmes, leaning back in his chair, tried to reason with him. "John, we've been friends a long time. This will cost you a fortune if you don't settle. Just talk to her so you can move on." But John refused. "No, Woody. I know what she'll say. She'll either admit the affair and beg for forgiveness or lie about it. I don't want to hear it. Hold off on the divorce. It's not important anymore. I'm not planning to remarry." Holmes sighed. "Okay, John. But when you're ready, let's have dinner. It's been too long." John apologized for not reaching out sooner, knowing Holmes was still grieving the loss of his wife. He promised to call soon, then left the office, his shoulders slumped in the cold gray afternoon. John returned to his new townhouse, a rental he'd spent weeks fixing up to start his new life. As he walked through the rooms, he simmered at Esther's refusal to let go. Despite the spacious modern surroundings, what truly pleased him was the small add-on, a hot tub where he had spent many hours relaxing, trying to ease his mental tension. Meanwhile, Irene was going through her own troubles. "Damn it, Irene, it's not the end of the world," Tony yelled. "It's just not working." "Screw you, Tony," Irene shot back. "You're just scared of your mother. Get out." She turned away, hiding her tears. Tony hesitated, looking regretful, then quietly left. Irene collapsed on the sofa, a wry smile on her lips. She didn't truly love Tony, but it frustrated her that she couldn't keep a man. "What's wrong with me?" she wondered. "Why can't I find someone to share my life with?" Irene took a deep breath and headed to the bathroom. After using the toilet, she stepped into the shower, letting the hot water wash away some of her tension. She quickly soaped up, rinsed off, and dried herself with a towel. As she reached for her robe, she caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror and critically examined her reflection, a tall, mature woman with flawless olive skin and short, dark hair framing her face. She grimaced and muttered, "Crap." Irritated, she threw on her robe and flopped onto the bed. She tried to distract herself by reading a novel, but quickly gave up, tossing the book aside. "Damn it, I need a drink," she said aloud. She went to the kitchen, poured herself a bourbon on the rocks, and sank into an easy chair in the living room, wondering where her life was headed. "Stop feeling sorry for yourself," she muttered. "I need company. I need to get out." An idea sparked, and she picked up the phone and dialed. "John, it's Irene. Are you busy? I'd like to come over." After hearing his response, she said, "Great, I'll see you in an hour or sooner." As darkness fell, Irene pulled into John's driveway. Before she could ring the bell, John opened the door and pulled her into the warm foyer. "Perfect timing," John laughed. The food just arrived. Give me your coat and let's eat. Wow, John, you sure know how to treat a girl. I didn't realize how hungry I was until now, Irene replied. They chatted while enjoying Chinese takeout, then moved to the living room with the last of a bottle of wine. After some banter, John suggested, "Enough of this light stuff. Let's get serious." He fetched a bottle of good scotch, poured them both a drink, and settled across from her. "Okay, what's bothering you? Tell Uncle John." Irene laughed and sipped her drink. "This is good stuff, John, but yeah, it's Tony. He broke up with me today. What's wrong with me? Why can't I keep a man?" John leaned forward. "Renee, the problem is the guys you choose. You're a beautiful, intelligent woman, but you keep picking idiots who break your heart." Irene was taken aback, initially angry, but soon realized he was right. "Son of a witch, you're right. Why haven't I seen that before?" "You're not a loser, Renee," John reassured her. "Maybe you should talk to someone who can help. Hell, maybe I should too." They exchanged a look, then burst into laughter. "What a pair we are," Irene said, taking another sip. "At least you had almost 20 great years with one woman." Realizing her mistake as she saw John's eyes tear up, she quickly apologized. "Nah, it's okay," John replied. "Those were wonderful years, which makes this all the harder. When trust is gone, everything is suspect." He sighed. "Let's just get drunk together." They continued drinking, knowing it wouldn't help but not caring. After a while, Irene slurred, "Johnny, you never let me use that spa out there." "Let's do it now," John agreed, stumbling toward her. With their arms linked, they made their way to the alcove. "Uh-oh, no swimsuit," Irene said, laughing. "Screw it, let's skinny dip," John replied, and they both undressed. They soon found themselves in the warm, swirling water, John admiring Irene's beauty, and Irene, uncharacteristically unashamed, returning the compliment. "You're not so bad either, Johnny," she said with a smile as they settled into the spa. They sat side by side, enjoying the warm jets of water. Despite the whiskey fogging his mind, John knew he had to be careful not to jeopardize their friendship. Irene, however, was less hesitant. "Should I make a move? Will he get angry? Oh, hell, why not?" she thought, and moved closer to John. John tensed at her approach, but quickly pulled back, splashing water on his face. "Damn, I'm sorry, Renee, I just can't. I'm sorry," he muttered, trembling slightly. Irene helped the now despondent John out of the spa and into a robe, then guided him to bed like a child. He fell asleep almost immediately. Knowing she couldn't drive home, Irene settled into the second bedroom but struggled to sleep. She realized that John, despite being separated from Esther, was still unavailable. In her heart, she knew she didn't truly love him as more than a friend. Her tears were for John's pain, knowing how deeply he loved Esther and how her betrayal would haunt him. Irene knew John was suffering, but she didn't know how to help. Meanwhile, Esther was also struggling. She had lost weight, looked pale, and was drained. Irene decided to visit Esther, sensing her need for support. "Renee, I messed up badly, but John is wrong. I never had an affair with Jim or anyone else. I can't get him to talk to me. He thinks I've been unfaithful for months, but I haven't. What he saw that night was the first time anything like that happened," Esther explained tearfully. "I understand, Esther, but John is adamant. He won't see or talk to you. I've never seen him like this," Irene replied. "I've hurt him so badly," Esther whispered. "I think he's too hurt even to face me, and I don't blame him." Trying to regain her composure, Esther asked, "Renee, can you stay with me for a while? I need your support." "Of course I'll stay," Irene agreed, though she wished she could do more. Esther looked at her watch and made a call. "Woody, it's Esther. I've decided to give John what he wants. No conditions. Yes, I'll see you tomorrow." Turning to Irene, she said, "I'm going to give John the divorce. He deserves closure, and I can't keep fighting this." Irene paled. "Esther, are you sure? I know you both love each other. Maybe I can talk to John again." "No, it's not fair to keep him in limbo. He's made it clear our marriage is over, and I have no one to blame but myself," Esther said, her voice wavering. "But please stay with me. I really need you right now." "Of course, I'll stay as long as you need," Irene reassured her, taking her cold hands. Later, John was stunned when his attorney, Woody, informed him that Esther wasn't going to fight the divorce. "She's not fighting it? She never gives in easily. What's going on?" "Let her come and see if she goes through with it. I won't hold my breath, though," John replied. After agreeing to meet Woody for dinner, John wandered through his home, feeling conflicted. He should have felt satisfied, but instead he felt uneasy. "What the hell is wrong with me?" he muttered. "I'm getting what I wanted, right? So why this feeling?" As he reached for a beer in the kitchen, the phone rang. Hello? Oh, hi, Renee. What's up? Forget it. Oh, sure. I'm meeting Woody Holmes tonight, but you're welcome to join us. I'll pick you up around 6:30. And Renee, no more nagging, okay? See you this evening. Bye. Later that evening, John and Irene entered the restaurant where Woody Holmes was waiting. Distracted by thoughts of Esther and the divorce, John introduced his friends rather mechanically. It wasn't until he noticed the silence that he saw Irene blushing and Woody holding her hand as if he never wanted to let go. Hey, you two, John teased. You're like teenagers on a blind date. I take it you like each other. Woody blushed and released Irene's hand. Sorry about that, he stammered. Irene, still blushing, laughed nervously and quickly took a seat. Geez, John, you're embarrassing us. Throughout dinner, they avoided discussing John's pending divorce, agreeing to wait until Esther actually signed the papers before speculating. The evening's focus shifted to Woody and Irene, leaving John as the third wheel. He didn't mind and watched with a bemused smile as his friends grew more smitten with each other. John realized this meeting might be good for both of them. Woody might find solace after his wife's passing, and Irene might have finally found a decent man. After dinner, John excused himself to the restroom. When he returned, Woody stammered, John, I hope this is okay. Oh, for pity's sake, Irene interrupted. John, Woody would like to drive me home. I'm sure you won't mind. John teased. Well, I don't know. I did pick you up. John, Irene warned. John laughed. Of course not. I don't mind at all. The next day, Esther arrived at Woody's office. It's nice to see you, even under these circumstances, Woody said, shaking her hand. Please, have a seat. Thanks, Woody. Let's get this over with. I understand why John refuses to see or speak with me, Esther said wearily. Woody noticed how pale and tired she looked. I'm sorry, Esther. I tried to change his mind, but you know how stubborn he is. I'm glad you're not contesting the divorce, though. Esther nodded and signed the papers without reading them, surprising Woody. Aren't you going to read it? What for? I trust you, and I know John won't screw me over. He has more integrity than I do, she replied softly. Esther, this must be tearing you apart. Now that you've signed, I'll try to talk to John again. He might be more open now, Woody suggested. Esther shrugged. Whatever happens, I'll understand. I ruined my marriage, and I don't blame anyone but myself. I hope John and I could at least be friends, but... Tears welled up, and she quickly excused herself. After she left, Woody called Irene. Renee, Esther just left. She signed the divorce papers without even reading them. Can you talk to John and let him know? Maybe we can make him feel a bit guilty about refusing to talk to her. Yes, we're meddling, but for a good cause. Let's meet tonight at 7. John stood outside the home he once shared with Esther, feeling anxious and sweating despite the chilly weather. He hesitated, wondering if meeting her was the right decision. Irene's last conversation with him still bothered him. She insisted that Esther wasn't making excuses, but that the situation was a mix of booze, success, and flattery from Jim. Nonsense, Irene, John had snapped. You're saying it was just because she was near him? That's not what I meant, Irene shot back. Eventually, she convinced John to meet Esther. As John debated leaving, Esther opened the door, silhouetted by the light behind her. John, please come in, she pleaded. John straightened, forcing a smile. Okay, thank you, Esther, he muttered, stepping inside the house that once was his home. Everything seemed unchanged, except for a light layer of dust, which surprised him, knowing how meticulous Esther usually was. He didn't comment. John, thank you for agreeing to see me, Esther said softly. I appreciate it, and I promise I won't keep you long. Okay, Esther. Woody and Irene convinced me to come. I don't see how this will help, but since you're not contesting the divorce, I agreed to meet, John replied flatly, with no warmth in his voice. Esther swallowed, knowing this confrontation would be difficult, but she was determined to face it. She needed to tell John the truth and admit her foolishness, hoping for his forgiveness, which she felt would cleanse her conscience. John, please, just listen. I need you to hear me, Esther pleaded, her eyes full of desperation. John paused, his gaze intense, before nodding and sitting stiffly. Okay, Esther, I'm listening, he said. Esther took a deep breath. John, please believe me when I say I never slept with Jim or anyone else. I never intended to. I know what you saw that night seems to contradict this, but it's the truth. John interrupted. Esther, the truth is rarely pure and never simple. Blushing, Esther pressed on. I can't fully explain my behavior that night. I've tormented myself, asking why I let it happen. The only reasons I can think of are the relief of finishing the contract and the booze I drank. But those are no excuses. I was someone I'm ashamed of, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. John sat expressionless, his emotions churning. Strangely, he believed her claim of not sleeping with Jim, but that only added to his inner turmoil. I was also angry with you, John, Esther admitted. I felt you weren't being supportive, but I know that's no excuse. I've replayed everything in my mind, and I realize how shallow and stupid I was. But believe me, John, you can't hate me more than I hate myself, she whispered, wiping her tears. Is there any way we can save our marriage? Counseling, anything? John sighed, feeling a deep sense of loss. Esther, if I hadn't interrupted that night, can you honestly say you wouldn't have ended up in bed with him? Wouldn't have been unfaithful? Esther gasped, realizing she couldn't truthfully deny it. She knew she would have crossed that line, and the weight of that truth made her feel sick. You see, Esther, that's the issue, John said, his voice rising before he forced himself to calm down. You cheated on our marriage when you let him kiss you. When you returned those kisses, and when you let him undress and touch you, things meant only for me, your husband. Do you understand? Esther now fully grasped what John was saying. She hadn't considered the full implications of that night until now, and she knew he was right. She would have ended up in Jim's bed, and that realization brought a wave of hopelessness and tears. John looked at her with pity. I feel sorry for you, Essie, and for myself. Maybe I share some blame. I could have been more supportive. But that doesn't excuse your behavior. He continued softly. Now, I have to ask myself a question. Can I live with suspicion or regret? Can I continue our marriage with the constant fear you'll betray me again? Or is it better to live with the regret of our failed marriage? I'm sorry, Essie. I can't live with suspicion. Regret is easier. John stood, watching his wife sobbing on the sofa, and then slowly walked out into the night. I grew up in a quiet, unassuming town where life seemed to move at a leisurely pace, yet the undercurrents of drama were always present. My parents were traditionalists, Dad a disciplined, no-nonsense man who worked in local law enforcement, and Mom the warm-hearted anchor of our family, who often volunteered at the community center. From a young age, I learned the value of structure and integrity, qualities that, ironically, would be tested repeatedly in my adult life. My first real taste of betrayal came at 12, when my closest friend Mark lied about breaking Dad's prized fishing rod. I discovered the truth by accident and confronted him. Though it seemed trivial, it planted the seeds of mistrust that would shape how I viewed relationships. Mark and I drifted apart, and by high school, our connection was nothing more than a distant memory. During high school, I discovered my love for civil engineering, drawn to the idea of building structures that would stand the test of time. Around the same time, I met Laura. She was in my sophomore science class, a bright, tech-savvy girl with a quick wit and a smile that could light up a room. We started out as friends, helping each other with homework and sitting together at lunch. By the time junior year rolled around, our friendship had grown into something more, and we began dating. Laura quickly became a central part of my life. Not just my girlfriend, but my confidant and partner in everything. From late-night study sessions to weekend adventures, we were inseparable. By senior year, I believed we had something truly special, a relationship strong enough to withstand any challenge life might bring. As the years went by, subtle shifts began to emerge at home. Laura, who had always been the embodiment of focus and determination, started to seem more distant. Dinners together became less frequent, often postponed or canceled with vague excuses about work commitments. Her once lively and engaging demeanor grew quieter, and there was a certain detachment in her gaze that I couldn't quite understand. I tried to attribute it to the pressures of her demanding job. She was excelling in her career, after all. But a quiet, persistent unease began to take root deep within me. It wasn't until weeks later that these suspicions began to harden into something undeniable. There were whispers, little signs I'd been too distracted to see clearly, and then, on a day that started like any other, a chain of events began to unfold that would shatter the illusion of stability I'd clung to for so long. It brought me to that moment, standing by my car, waiting to confront truths I could no longer ignore. Perched on the front of a car parked near license plate 128, I waited quietly. The sound of a door creaking open caught my attention, and soon they emerged, their movements deliberate. Her gaze briefly landed on me before darting away, her face drained of all color, as if caught in an unthinkable act. Sliding off the hood, I noticed him lifting his hands in an almost defensive gesture. My voice was calm but firm as I said, "Don't worry, neither of you is worth the trouble." Without another word, I walked toward my car, got in, and drove away, leaving them to their unease. The path to that moment was a long one. Jim and I met when his family moved in next door. We were both 8, the only boys in a neighborhood full of girls our age. Naturally, we became inseparable, like brothers. By the time 4th grade ended, we had each other's backs in everything. Little league, soccer, and every misadventure in between. Through high school, our bond never wavered. If you messed with Jim, you dealt with me, and vice versa. By senior year, we were still going strong. Jim was dating Annabelle Spears, and the 4 of us often went on double dates. On prom night, Laura and I took the next step in our relationship in one room, while Jim and Annabelle did the same in another. After graduation, life took us in different directions. Jim chose the Navy over college. Annabelle was furious, calling him every name in the book, but still promised to wait for him once he settled at a duty station. Meanwhile, Laura and I went to college, me at Eastern Michigan University for civil engineering, and her at the University of Michigan for IT. The 2 campuses were only a half-hour apart, so we kept our relationship alive, though not without complications. There were cracks, subtle at first. Laura canceled plans a few times, claiming she had too much studying to do. Friends at her school told me otherwise, that she was going out with other guys. One night I saw it for myself. I arrived unannounced and watched her climb into a car with some guy. I followed them to a restaurant on Ann Arbor Road, waited 10 minutes, and then went inside. I spotted them tucked away in a corner booth, sitting close. His arm was around her, and she didn't seem to mind. I took a seat at a distant booth where I could observe without being noticed. Laura's reaction was immediate once she heard my voice as I ordered. Her eyes widened, and she quickly pushed his arm away. The confusion on his face said it all. This wasn't their first outing. They were comfortable enough to be intimate in public, and she hadn't expected to get caught. I stayed calm, finished my meal, and left without confronting her. The next day, I skipped our Friday night date without explanation. I turned off my phone and enjoyed a quiet evening with a good book. On Saturday, I went to a frat party, met a gorgeous brunette named Robin, and got her number. Sunday afternoon, my doorbell rang. It was Laura. She marched past me as soon as I opened the door, demanding answers. "Where were you Friday night? Why didn't you answer your phone?" I leaned against the doorframe and said, "Which question do you want me to answer first?" Her brows furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You asked 3 questions, I replied calmly. "Pick one." "Don't play games, Rob," she snapped. "What's going on?" I sighed. "Fine. Friday night, I stayed in. Saturday, I went to a party. And as for the phone, I turned it off." Her expression darkened as she crossed her arms. "Why didn't you call me if you weren't coming?" "I figured you'd already made other plans. With your boyfriend," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Her jaw dropped. "What are you talking about? You're my boyfriend." "Then who was the guy at the restaurant Thursday night?" I asked, folding my arms. She stammered. "He's just a friend." "Sitting hip to hip, his arm around you, that's just friendly?" My voice sharpened. "If it was so innocent, why didn't you come over and say hi, maybe introduce us?" She fired back. "Why didn't you come over if it bothered you so much?" "I wanted to see how you acted," I said flatly. Her voice rose with indignation. "Why would you do that?" "Because people keep telling me you're seeing other guys," I replied. "I needed to see it for myself." Her frustration boiled over. "You don't own me, Rob. We never agreed to an exclusive relationship." I stared at her, stunned. "I thought we did. I gave you my class ring and Letterman jacket as a sign of commitment." She shook her head, exasperated. "That's high school stuff, Rob. It doesn't mean anything now." I nodded. "Fair enough. If it doesn't matter to you, it doesn't matter to me. I met someone at the party Saturday, and she gave me her number. Maybe I'll call her." Laura's face twisted in anger. "Fine, do what you want," she snapped before storming out. As I watched her leave, I realized she didn't apologize, make excuses, or even try to salvage our relationship. To her, the rules had changed. It hurt to let go of someone I'd been with for so long, but it was better to face the truth now than drag things out further. I had a ton of homework earlier in the week, so I didn't get around to calling Robin until Thursday. We chatted for a while and set up a date for Friday night. I picked her up, and after dinner she suggested skipping a movie and heading to a party she'd heard about. The party was at an apartment in Belleville. We arrived a little after 8, and wouldn't you know it, fate had a sense of humor. The first people I saw as we walked in were Laura and the guy she'd been with the previous Thursday. "Oh, great," I muttered under my breath. Robin noticed immediately and leaned closer. "What's wrong?" she asked. I nodded subtly toward a pair of people across the room. "Them," I said quietly. She frowned, puzzled. "Do you know them?" "I know her," I replied, keeping my voice low. "Ever heard of Miss Piggy?" Robin blinked. "Miss Piggy? That's her nickname?" "Yep," I confirmed. "Why that nickname?" she asked, still confused. I sighed. "She's got a reputation, a real mess. Someone came up with it and it stuck." Robin gave me a skeptical look. "Are you sure she deserves it?" I shrugged. "What else would you call a girl who's supposedly planning to marry her boyfriend but sneaks around with other guys when he's not around?" Her expression hardened slightly. "Do you know that for a fact?" "No," I admitted. "Not firsthand, but I've heard it from enough people to believe it." Robin tilted her head, studying me. "And how do you know her?" she asked cautiously. I hesitated before answering. "I was the guy she claimed she was going to marry," I said evenly. "At least until I caught her with that guy last week." Robin's eyes widened. "Wow, so fireworks tonight?" "Nope," I said with a shake of my head. "We broke up on Sunday. It's over." She raised an eyebrow and smirked. "What are the odds you'd have asked me out if last Thursday hadn't happened?" "Pretty slim," I admitted, meeting her gaze with a faint smile. "But Thursday did happen, and we're here to enjoy ourselves. Let's go do that." She smiled, took my hand, and led me across the room to introduce me to the host. Laura, standing off to the side, noticed me immediately and froze. Her expression was a mix of shock and unease. I couldn't tell if it was because she didn't expect me at this kind of party or because she felt guilty about being with someone new. Either way, I ignored her as Robin introduced me to Gary and his wife, Artisan. We made small talk before heading off to grab drinks. The basement had been turned into a dance floor, and Robin and I spent most of the night dancing and meeting new people. Every now and then, I caught Laura watching me, her expression unreadable. Around 11, Robin said she needed to call it a night since she had things to take care of the next day. We said goodbye to our hosts, and as I drove her home, she commented, "Your ex spent a lot of time looking at you tonight." "She was probably just surprised to see me there," I replied. Robin shook her head, her expression thoughtful. "No, I think she was uncomfortable seeing you with someone else." I shrugged, unconcerned. "That's her problem. She's the one who ended things." "Maybe so," Robin said, glancing toward the woman in question, but she didn't seem too happy about it. "She'll have to get used to it," I replied, my tone matter-of-fact. Robin turned back to me, a teasing smile playing on her lips. "So, does this mean I'll be seeing you again, or are you planning to date every girl you meet?" I smiled, meeting her gaze. "I prefer one girl at a time. I had a great time tonight, and I'm definitely going to ask you out again. As long as you say yes, you'll be the only one." Robin raised an eyebrow, her tone playful. "What if I'm not ready to settle down with just one guy?" "Then you'll say no," I said with a grin, "and I'll find someone else. If that doesn't work out, I'll circle back to you. Rinse and repeat until I find someone who's all in." Robin laughed, her eyes sparkling. "I like your confidence. Let's give it a shot. How about tomorrow night?" "Perfect," I said, smiling back. When we got to her door, she surprised me by saying, "I usually don't kiss on the first date, but I guess there's a first time for everything." She kissed me softly and added, "See you tomorrow." When I got home, Dad was still awake. As I walked through the door, he glanced up from the couch. "Laura called," he said. "She sounded upset." I shrugged. "It's late. I'll deal with it in the morning." The next day, I slept in. By the time I stumbled out of bed, it was late morning. Mom was waiting in the kitchen with a cup of tea. "Laura's already called twice," she said, looking at me pointedly. "Not until I've had coffee," I grumbled, heading for the coffee pot. Mom raised an eyebrow. "Things aren't going well between you two, huh?" I poured a mug and leaned against the counter. "It's not just us anymore." Mom tilted her head. "Does she know that?" "She should," I replied. "She's the one who opened that door." Before Mom could say more, the phone rang again. She picked it up, listened for a moment, and then handed it to me. "It's Laura," I sighed, taking the phone. "What?" I said, not bothering to hide my irritation. "Why didn't you call?" Laura demanded, her voice sharp. "It was late when I got home, and I just woke up." I said evenly. That's not what I meant, she snapped. Why didn't you pick me up for our usual Friday date? I set my coffee down. We talked about this last Sunday, Laura. You said we weren't exclusive anymore, remember? So I decided to take your advice and see other people. That's not what I meant, Rob, she protested. You should have known that. Don't give me that, I shot back. I saw you with that guy last Thursday. I wasn't with him, Rob. I went to the party alone and he just happened to be there, she insisted. Right, sure. My tone was cold. It doesn't matter anymore. I've been hearing all kinds of stories about you, like how you earned the nickname Miss Piggy. That's not true, Rob, she exclaimed, her voice shaking. Whatever you've heard, it's all lies. After what I saw at the restaurant, I said, cutting her off. Sorry, I don't believe you, and I'm done. Give me back my ring and Letterman jacket. They're meaningless to you anyway. Goodbye. I hung up the phone, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. Mom, who had overheard the conversation, gave me a small nod. She made her choice, she said softly. And so did you. Meanwhile, Robin and I started spending more time together. Around the same time, I was getting letters from Jim. He'd completed boot camp and was training for the Navy SEALs. He never mentioned Annabelle, so I didn't either. Not that he'd want to know. Annabelle had been with a string of guys since he left. Eventually, she disappeared completely. The next I heard, Jim had finished his training, was stationed in Norfolk, and planned to marry her. He wrote, "Wish you could be my best man, but we had to move fast to get on the base housing list." Poor guy, I thought. The moment he steps out the door, she'll have someone else in her bed before the echo of it closing even fades. Thanks to a college fund set up by my grandparents when I was born, I wasn't hurting for money. It covered tuition and even let me rent an off-campus apartment. By the start of my junior year, Robin and I decided to move in together. It gave me a glimpse of what married life might feel like, and honestly, I loved it. After 6 months of living together, I started thinking about taking the next step, making things permanent. Although a part of me worried that what we had was too good to last. Robin gave no hint that she wasn't as committed as I was. At least, not until I suggested she start looking for an engagement ring. That's when she dropped a bombshell. After graduation, she planned to move back to California and marry her childhood sweetheart, who was currently studying in England on a Rhodes Scholarship. He and I have an open relationship, she explained. We agreed it wasn't realistic for two young, healthy people to go years without being physical with someone else. He knows about you, and I know about the English girl he's seeing. It shouldn't change things for us in the short term, she added, as if that would make me feel better. But of course, it did change things, at least for me. Overnight, what I thought was a romantic relationship turned into something more like a friendship. And while I valued Robin as a person, I needed more than just fun and casual companionship. Over time, we started to drift apart. 4 months later, almost to the day, Robin confronted me. "You don't want to be here anymore, do you?" I admitted that I didn't feel comfortable staying and explained why. "I'm sorry, love," she said softly. "I almost wish I didn't love Alex so much. If it weren't for him, you'd be my first choice." "Thanks, I guess," I replied. "So what do we do now? Flip a coin to see who moves out?" She shook her head. "No need. I've been expecting this. My mom still hasn't rented out my old room. She says she's keeping it for me until I turn 40, or until she has grandkids." "So I'm the one leaving?" "Friends?" she asked. "Always." She hugged me, then whispered, "One last night together, please." A week later, I was back at home, trying to adjust to life without Robin. On Friday night, as I worked on an article for school, Mom called up the stairs. "Rob, someone's here to see you." I went down and found her chatting with Laura. "I'll leave you two alone," Mom said, disappearing into the kitchen. "Hi, Rob," Laura said tentatively. "Hi," I replied. "What brings you here?" Laura shifted awkwardly. "Robin called me. She said you're back on the market and suggested I should hurry if I wanted to be first in line." I frowned. "Why would you even want to be in line?" She sighed. "There wouldn't be a line if I hadn't been so stupid. Robin never would have existed in your life if I hadn't messed up. I just want to come back to where I belong." "Where you belong?" I asked, puzzled. She held up her hand, showing me my class ring still on her finger. "I never gave this back," she said. Then she added, "There's a party at Alice Johnson's house tonight. Want to take me?" At the party, Laura made a show of holding up the ring. "Just so everyone knows," she announced, "I've reclaimed what's mine." After the party, she was unusually quiet on the drive home, staring out the window. When I pulled up in front of her house, I asked, Do you want to go apartment hunting with me this weekend? Splitting rent will be cheaper than living in motels. She glanced over at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. Wait, are you asking me to move in with you? I gave her a small smile. The thought has crossed my mind. She tilted her head, considering. What time should I be ready? Around 9, I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. She grinned. Good. You've got a date. Laura and I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment midway between Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti. We converted the second bedroom into an office, where we set up desks for her computer and my work. About a month later, Jim came home on leave, and he and Annabelle often hung out with us. They seemed happy together, which made me wonder if I'd misjudged Annabelle's character. But after Jim returned to Iraq, Annabelle wasted no time moving in with another man. A few weeks later, she was spotted with yet another guy, a former boyfriend. Gossip swirled about her hosting wild parties and engaging in questionable behavior. I thought about telling Jim, but Laura talked me out of it. Rob, it's not our business, she said. For all we know, Jim and Annabelle have an open marriage. It happens in the military. That doesn't sound like something Jim would agree to, I said. Even if it's not, Laura replied. Do you think he'll thank you for telling him? He loves her. He'll just blame you for ruining everything. Let it go. Jim returned from Afghanistan just in time to be the best man at my wedding to Laura. Afterward, he and Annabelle moved to Norfolk for the final months of his service. When he was discharged, they came back home and Jim found work with a construction company. For 2 years, they seemed happy. They often visited Laura and me, and there was no sign of trouble. But when Jim took a 4-month job in Alaska, everything unraveled. Annabelle quickly started seeing another man, Gary Mellows, Jim's boss. By the time Laura and Annabelle crossed paths at their doctor's office, Annabelle was 7 weeks pregnant, even though Jim had been gone for over 3 months. The truth reached Jim through mutual acquaintances. He flew home unannounced, rented a car, and parked near his house. When he saw Gary enter the house, Jim waited 15 minutes before walking in with a digital camera, ready to catch them in the act. 15 minutes later, an ambulance arrived in response to an emergency call, taking Mellows to the hospital. When the police showed up, they were ready to arrest Jim until he showed them the photos on his camera. Jim had been using a Canon Rebel set to continue his shooting, and the series of images clearly captured Mellows lunging at him. While Mellows may have been trying to grab the camera, the photos made it obvious that Jim was acting in self-defense. The officers accepted Jim's explanation and left. 20 minutes later, Annabelle emerged from the house with a single suitcase and locked the door behind her. The divorce process was swift and uneventful, as was the lawsuit Jim filed against Mellows for alienation of affection. Jim also filed a maltreatment suit, claiming Mellows had hired him only to send him out of town so he could pursue Annabelle. Mellows could have settled out of court and avoided the public spectacle, but he chose to fight. This decision backfired spectacularly, exposing his actions to everyone. The jury ruled in Jim's favor, awarding him $1.3 million. After covering court costs and taxes, Jim walked away with just over $750,000. He used the money to pay off his house, install an in-ground pool, and buy a new Ford F-350. Once the divorce was finalized, Annabelle vanished, and rumors spread that she had left town. Mellows, meanwhile, had to sell equipment and property to cover the judgment. His business took a hit as clients deserted him, unwilling to trust a man who betrayed one of his employees. With some money left in the bank, Jim approached me with an idea. Why don't we start our own company? We can scoop up the business Mellows lost. You handle the design and I'll take care of the construction. Laura and I discussed it, crunched the numbers, and decided to go for it. That's how RJ Constructors was born. The partnership worked well. We not only picked up many of Mellows' former clients, but we also beat him out on several major projects. Jim made sure everyone knew when we outperformed Mellows, fueling our reputation. The next 5 years flew by. Jim dated casually, but never found anyone he wanted to settle down with. He spent a lot of time with Laura and me, often joining us for outings with his latest girlfriend. Life was good. Laura's career was thriving. She'd risen to a regional manager position and was a top contender for a VP role. I didn't think things could get any better. Unfortunately, I was right. One Tuesday, after wrapping up a lunch meeting with a potential client, I was approached by none other than Gary Mellows. "Can I buy you a drink?" he asked. I didn't hold any personal grudge against Gary. As far as I was concerned, if Annabelle had thrown herself at him, it wasn't entirely his fault for giving in. I never fully bought into the story about him scheming to send Jim away. I always figured Annabelle probably visited Gary's office under the guise of picking up Jim's paycheck and made her intentions clear. Sure, I said, accepting his offer. As we sat down, Gary started the conversation casually. How's business? Not bad, I replied. Could always be better. Ever thought about selling? He asked. Selling? Why would I do that? To make Jim my partner, I laughed. Are you serious? He opened his briefcase, pulled out a folder, and handed it to me. Take a look. Inside, I found several photos. The first showed Laura and Jim holding hands as they entered a motel room. The others captured them leaving the motel, kissing or hugging in public. My stomach dropped. Gary leaned back in his chair. I'm sorry. I hired someone to follow Jim to dig up dirt for Payback. When the private investigator gave me these photos, I didn't know she was your wife, but I knew from the rings she was married, so I had the investigator figure out who she was. I stared at him, stunned. Why? You were guilty of what Jim accused you of. Gary shrugged. Not exactly. Yes, I had an affair with Annabelle, but I didn't scheme to send Jim out of town. She came to my office, shut the door, and started taking her clothes off. She told me, You sent Jim away, so you'll have to take care of me while he's gone. What was I supposed to do? I'm single, and Annabelle was persuasive. He paused for a moment, then added bitterly, As far as I'm concerned, this is Jim's fault. Everyone knows Annabelle's reputation. He should have seen it coming. I let out a frustrated sigh. Regardless, you slept with her. Why go after him now? Because he ruined me with that lawsuit, Gary said, his voice hard. And I want payback. I'm just sorry you're caught in the middle. I gestured toward the photos spread out on the table. How long has this been going on? The investigator says at least a year, Gary replied. Maybe longer. I shook my head, disbelief creeping into my voice. How could it have gone on for so long without me knowing? Gary leaned forward, his tone almost sympathetic. If she never gave you a reason to be suspicious, how would you know? I studied him for a moment before asking. So why do you want to buy me out? What's your endgame? A sly smirk spread across Gary's face. As Jim's partner, I'd have equal say in every decision. If he wants to do A, I'll push for B. And since I'll have access to your pricing, I'll make sure my other company underbids you on every job. I'll bankrupt the business and leave Jim with nothing. I frowned. And you? Gary's smirk widened. I've already done the math. If the company fails, I'll recoup most of my investment by selling the assets. Plus, I'll profit from the contracts my other company takes away from you. I clenched my jaw. What if Jim decides to retaliate? Gary chuckled. Let him try. I learned my lesson after that first confrontation. If he comes at me again, I'll be ready. He stood up and tossed one last remark over his shoulder. If you're interested in selling, let me know. I left the meeting reeling. How could Laura and Jim have been carrying on behind my back for over a year? I'd never seen a single sign of dissatisfaction from her. To me, everything in our relationship had seemed perfect. What had I missed? I couldn't dismiss Gary's evidence, but I also couldn't trust it completely. He had every reason to manipulate the situation for his own gain. Determined to know the truth, I contacted a friend at an insurance agency and got a referral for a private investigator. 13 days later, I had confirmation. On Wednesdays, when Jim was supposedly visiting job sites, he was actually meeting Laura at the Comfort Inn on Melrose. How she managed to slip away from work for these rendezvous was beyond me. My task now was deciding how to proceed. Deep down, I already knew what I wanted to do. It was just a matter of figuring out how to execute it. After a 2-hour meeting with my lawyer, I had a clear understanding of my options. We lived in a no-fault divorce state, which meant everything would be split equally. My biggest concern was ensuring that Laura didn't get a dime from the sale of my share of the business. To make that happen, I realized I'd have to bend the truth. Even so, she would still likely get some of the money. I struck a deal with Mellows to sell him my portion of the company. On paper, it appeared I sold it for 1/3 of its actual value, and that portion went into a personal bank account under my name. The remaining 2/3? That went straight into an offshore account I'd set up beforehand. The arrangement was that Mellows wouldn't step into the office or occupy my desk until the next morning. Once everything was set, I handed Laura and Jim their respective documents. Divorce papers for Laura, citing infidelity, and a lawsuit for Jim on the grounds of alienation of affection. Even though no-fault laws applied, I could still file for infidelity, which might sway the division of assets in my favor, depending on the judge. For the infidelity claim to stick, I needed solid proof. Comparing the private investigator's reports from Gary and my own detective showed that Laura and Jim consistently met at the same motel, always on Wednesdays. My investigator rented a room and set up hidden cameras to capture their activities. A generous tip to the motel staff ensured that Laura and Jim would be placed in that particular room. On Wednesday morning, I called Maria, our receptionist, and told her, "Let Jim know I won't be in this morning. I've got a dentist appointment. And if I'm not feeling up to it after the extraction, I may skip the afternoon too." "Got it, boss. Honestly, you should just go home and rest. Dental work is no joke," she replied sympathetically. After Laura left for work, I returned to the house and let the locksmith in to change all the locks. By 9 a.m., the job was done. I then went to the bank and drained our accounts, including the safety deposit box. My lawyer had advised me to only take half, but I was in no mood to play fair. Screw Laura. She could fight for her share later. I also withdrew the amount I expected to receive from the business sale. If Jim wanted it back, he could take me to court. For now, I had the upper hand. At 12:10 p.m., my detective called. "They've arrived. Room 128, he said. I drove to the motel, met briefly with the detective, and parked outside the room. Sitting on the hood of a nearby car, I waited for them to emerge. When they finally did, I had a brief confrontation before walking away. As I left, another man approached them and served them with papers. Laura's packet included divorce papers and a temporary restraining order, barring her from coming within 500 feet of me or the house. To get the restraining order, I had to fabricate a story that I'd overheard them plotting against me, discussing my insurance policy and the value of my business assets. There was a pending hearing to determine whether the order would become permanent, but in the meantime, she couldn't enter the house without court approval, and I had no intention of giving her a key to the new locks. Jim's packet included a lawsuit for alienation of affection, along with a short pointed note. You know how these things work, don't you? How does it feel to be on the receiving end for a change? As I drove away, I called Mellows. "It's done. Enjoy your first day in the office tomorrow." From there, I headed straight to the airport, parked my car in long-term parking, tossed my phone in the glove compartment, and boarded a flight to Cabo San Lucas. For a week, I focused on scuba diving, relaxing on the beach, and clearing my mind. When I finally turned my phone back on, it was flooded with voicemails, mostly from Laura, though Jim had left 4 messages too. I wasn't interested in hearing from either of them. Would I have liked an explanation? Sure, but I'd already decided to put them behind me and move on. Their reasons for betraying me were irrelevant. I wasn't going to let them take up any more space in my thoughts. After checking in with my lawyer to let him know I was back, he informed me that Laura had been trying to contact me non-stop, desperate to retrieve her belongings. At first, I considered letting the court supervise her visit to the house. Then a better idea struck me. A way to mess with her. I called her myself. "What do you want?" I asked. "I need to get my clothes and other things from the house," she said, clearly frustrated. "The court staff won't let me break in, and I don't have a key." "You don't need to bother," I replied coldly. "I donated everything to Goodwill. I didn't want any reminders of your lying, cheating self in my home." "You had no right to do that," she shouted. "I had every right," I snapped. "Just like you had the right to stab me in the back. We're done, Laura. Goodbye." Of course, all her belongings were still in the house, but the satisfaction of messing with her was too good to pass up. Later, I called Maria, our receptionist, to check in on the company. "How's everything going over there?" I asked. "For me? Not bad," she replied, her tone wry. "For the company? A total disaster. Jim and Gary are at each other's throats all the time. They argue about everything, no matter how trivial. Jim orders materials, and the moment he leaves the office, Gary cancels the orders. Nothing's getting done because they're too busy fighting." She paused, then added with a hint of amusement, "I even resigned last week, but Gary doubled my salary to convince me to stay. Honestly, I'm just here for the chaos now." Maria paused before adding, "You should have stayed, Rob. Why did you sell your share to Gary?" I explained the whole situation to her. After a brief silence, Maria replied, "Well, now I have even more reason to stay." "And what's that?" I asked, curious. "To make Gary's life easier," she said bluntly. "I never liked Jim. He was always inappropriate with me, even threatening to fire me if I didn't go out with him. I shut him down, but he made things miserable for me. Honestly, I'm glad he's finally getting what's coming to him." I frowned. I wish you'd told me sooner. There was no need, she said with a shrug in her voice. I handled it. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry about what happened with Laura. But maybe it's a blessing in disguise for both of us. How do you figure? I asked. It means you're single, she said with a teasing edge. And maybe I'll finally get my shot. I laughed, surprised. I thought you were engaged. I was, until 3 weeks ago, when I caught him doing what Laura did to you. Well, Maria, I said, smiling despite myself, when I'm ready to date again, I'll make sure your name is at the top of the list. I'll hold you to that, she said playfully. In the meantime, don't be a stranger. That day, my phone rang endlessly, 16 times in total. 14 calls were from Laura and 2 from Jim. I couldn't fathom what Jim could possibly have to say that I'd want to hear. If he was looking for something from me, he was out of luck. Without a second thought, I deleted all the calls, ignoring any voicemails they left. By the time I got home, I felt oddly at peace. I cooked dinner, poured myself a drink, and decided to check in with Gary Mellows to see how his grand plan was unfolding. Things are going smoothly, Gary said with a smirk in his voice. I made sure to be sitting at your desk when Jim walked into the office. The moment he saw me, his face turned red, and he demanded to know what I was doing there. I smiled and said, "Meet your new partner." He looked like he'd swallowed a hornet. Watching him read the agreement was the highlight of my week. Gary paused for dramatic effect before continuing. Things escalated pretty quickly. Jim ordered a fuel truck for the Wilkins site because the equipment was running out of diesel. As soon as he left, I canceled the order. By the time one of the loaders ran dry, Jim was on the warpath yelling at Allied Fuel. They told him it was me who canceled the order and that they wouldn't tolerate his attitude. When he confronted me, I told him the prices were too high and I was looking for better options. That didn't sit well with him. I heard you two came to blows, I said, intrigued. Gary chuckled. We did. I overestimated my chances in a fistfight with him, but I got a few kicks in. Let's just say he'll be sore for a while. Well, keep at it. Looks like everything's going according to plan, I replied, ending the call. After hanging up, I headed to the room I'd turned into my office and sat down at the computer to update my resume. I was ready to start fresh and planned to begin my job search the next day. As I was working, the doorbell rang. Opening it, I found Jim standing there. What the hell do you want? I asked coldly. We need to talk, Rob, he said, looking sheepish. No, we don't, I replied sharply. It wasn't my fault, Jim blurted out. Laura came after me. I was in a bad place, angry about what Annabelle did, and I wasn't thinking clearly. I'm sorry, but I didn't go after her. But you knew she was my wife, I shot back. You knew how it felt when Annabelle cheated on you. And yet you didn't stop to think how it would feel for me. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? You were supposed to be my friend. Even if she threw herself at you, which I seriously doubt, you should have had the decency to say no. I turned Annabelle down when she tried it with me, and you should have done the same. Once might have been a mistake, but you didn't stop at once, did you? You kept going. You betrayed me, Jim, and there's no excuse. Why'd you sell out to Mellows? He asked. I stared at him for a moment, because if I hadn't, I might have handled things in a way that would have landed me behind bars, and you're not worth that. But I figured Mellows would give you the kind of misery that lasts longer than any fight. Then, without warning, I punched him. Grabbing his shirt, I yanked him inside, slammed the door shut, and let out every ounce of rage I'd been holding back. By the time I was done, Jim was unconscious. I dragged him to his car, shoved him into the driver's seat, and walked back into the house with a sense of grim satisfaction. If the cops showed up, I'd tell them he came at me first and that I had no choice but to defend myself. His recent fight with Mellows would only help my case. The next morning, I sent out 14 resumes and called my attorney for an update. He informed me that a hearing for the restraining order was scheduled for Monday, but Laura still hadn't retained legal representation. I considered calling her, but decided to wait. The longer she delayed, the more advantage I had. By midweek, I was already getting responses to my job applications. I flew to Atlanta for an interview on Wednesday and Baltimore on Thursday. Both went well, but a call from a San Diego company piqued my interest. I scheduled an interview for the following Tuesday and started imagining what life might be like in a city where the sun rarely took a day off. At Monday's hearing, the judge dismissed the restraining order, granting Laura access to the house. She arrived with her lawyer, but as soon as they approached me, I stopped them. You don't talk to me without my attorney, I said curtly. I just wanted to let you know I'll be coming by tonight, Laura said. No, you won't, I replied flatly. I'm flying out this afternoon and won't be back until Wednesday. You can come by after 6. Her lawyer started to argue, but I shut him down. She won't step foot in that house unless someone from the court is present to oversee it. She can wait 2 more days. Laura looked at her lawyer and shook her head. It's fine. I can wait, she said quietly. On Wednesday evening, Laura arrived with someone from her attorney's office. The court-appointed observer showed up shortly after. She introduced herself and explained her role in documenting anything Laura removed from the house. That's unnecessary, I told her. She can take whatever she wants. The woman raised an eyebrow. If that's the case, why make her wait? Because she betrayed me, I said bluntly. Not only did she cheat, but she did it with someone I thought was my best friend. I couldn't kick her, couldn't destroy her life, not without risking jail, but I could make her feel some of the pain she caused me. It's petty, sure, but it's all I've got. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. I let Laura and the man from her lawyer's office inside, then headed outside to mow the lawn. By the time I was done and came back into the house, everyone was gone, except Laura. She was sitting at the kitchen table, calmly sipping tea. She looked up as I entered. You lied, she said, her voice flat. You didn't give my things to Goodwill. Maybe not, I admitted with a shrug. But I sure did enjoy how angry it made you to think I had. She sighed, setting down her cup. I didn't think sorting through everything would be this complicated. It's going to take longer than I expected. I pulled my keys from my pocket, removed the house key, and slid it across the table toward her. Don't bother rushing. You can have the house by Friday. I'll have my stuff out by then. Why are you doing this? She asked. I've been interviewing for jobs, I said. As soon as I get one, I'm leaving the state. That's not what I mean, she said. Why go through all this? The restraining order, the lies about donating my things. If you're just giving me the house and leaving? I crossed my arms. That's a stupid question. After what you did, I had to do something to get back at you. You're lucky I handled it this way and not with violence. Laura's lips tightened. Dragging me through all this nonsense doesn't even come close to making us even, she said. But I guess it's what you needed to do. Still, I think we need to talk. I know you said no earlier, but I'm going to try to convince you that we don't have to go through with this divorce. Be serious, Laura, I said. There's no way I can stay married to you after what you did. That doesn't matter, she insisted. I love you, Rob. You know I do. What happened with Jim was just a mistake. A stupid, thoughtless mistake. I've always liked Jim, but I never loved him. I love you. I stared at her, incredulous. It doesn't matter whether you loved him or not. You still cheated. You had to know how I'd feel about that after how upset I was when Annabelle betrayed Jim. Remember how I wanted to tell him, but you talked me out of it? That should have clued you in. And don't feed me that I didn't want you to find out crap. Cheaters always get caught. Jim found out about Annabelle because someone told him, just like someone told me about you. Doesn't the fact that I love you count for anything? She pleaded. No, Laura, it doesn't, I replied firmly. Because your love clearly wasn't enough to stop you from betraying me. It didn't mean anything, Rob, she exclaimed. It was just Zex, a meaningless mistake. An accident, really? I said, shaking my head. How does sleeping with my best friend repeatedly qualify as an accident? Laura sighed and began her confession. Jim came by while you were on a trip to Santa Fe. He was in a terrible mood over Annabelle, missing her despite everything. We had a drink and he started crying. I hugged him, trying to comfort him, but it felt good. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. The next time you went out of town, we both knew why he was coming over. It was never about love. It was just excitement. I never neglected you, Rob. I love you. We don't have to end things. We can fix this. I laughed bitterly. Fix it? How? I'll never trust you again. You betrayed me, Laura. If I stayed, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering if you'd do it again. And based on what you just admitted, you didn't stop because you loved cheating so much. How am I supposed to believe any promise you make now when you've already broken the one you made when we got married? It's over, Laura. I want a divorce. I'm not giving up, she said firmly. I'll fight for us. My lawyer says the court can order counseling, and I know it will help. We'll get through this, Rob. I'm not letting you go. You still don't get it, I said, exasperated. It's not about love. I'll admit I still love you, but I can't live with you. Every time I look at you, I'll remember what you did with Jim. I can't live like that. She smirked darkly. If you try to divorce me, I'll release the video of what you did to Jim. Every family member, every coworker, and all your friends will see it. I'll plaster it across every amateur site I can find." "You're bluffing," I said, calling her out. "Am I?" she replied. I walked to my office, retrieved a copy of the security footage from my briefcase, and handed it to her. "Here," I said, "watch it, then decide if you really want to show this to anyone else." Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked away. "You can pick up the house on Friday," I called over my shoulder. "But for now you need to leave." Over the next 2 days, I packed up my belongings, put most of them in storage, and moved into a temporary apartment at the executive suites. For the following 2 weeks, I traveled across the country for job interviews in Salt Lake City, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Chicago, and Detroit. While I felt the interviews went well, I didn't hear back immediately from any of the companies. Sitting at my desk one evening, I reviewed my finances and realized I could survive for 6 years without working. I started researching cities with lower living costs, hoping to stretch my savings further, maybe 8, even 10 years. It was time for a fresh start, somewhere far from Laura and the mess she had created. Laura signed the divorce papers and sent them back to my attorney. For a moment, I almost wished she hadn't. A small part of me would have enjoyed scattering CDs of her and Jim's escapades all over the house for her to find. But a deal's a deal. According to our agreement, we were splitting everything 50-50ths, and each of us would handle our own legal fees. Since I was the one who initiated the divorce, I bore the cost of my lawyer. Laura got the house, which worked out fine since my share of the equity roughly matched what I still owed the bank. True, I had to give her half of what I made selling my stake in the company, but I'd planned ahead for that. The other 2/3 were safely hidden in an offshore account. Through the grapevine, I heard an amusing bit of gossip. After I left, Jim began maltreating Laura so aggressively that she had to file a restraining order against him. I didn't care what happened to either of them, but the irony made me laugh. For now, I decided to wait until the divorce was officially finalized before making any big decisions. Soon, companies began responding to the interviews I'd attended. One, based in San Diego, invited me back for a follow-up. I was starting to arrange travel when my phone buzzed. It was Gary Mellows. "How'd you like to own your old company again?" he asked. "Why on earth would I want it back?" I replied. "I sold it to you to get away from Jim. Why would I willingly become his partner again?" "You wouldn't have to," Gary assured me. "After our last blow-up, I told him that if he hated working with me so much, I'd either buy him out or sell his half to someone else. He didn't even hesitate. Asked how much I'd offer. He sold it to me for half of what I paid you." I couldn't help but laugh. "And why should I be interested? If you did even half of what you said you would to make Jim's life miserable, the company's probably worth peanuts now. You might be surprised. Come by the office and we'll talk." Curiosity got the better of me, so I went. The moment I walked in, Maria jumped up from her desk, gave me a big hug, and then poked her head into Gary's office to let him know I was there. Gary didn't waste any time. "As you know, I only bought your half of the company to mess with Jim," he began. "I never really wanted him as a partner, but things have shifted. I'm focusing more on construction and less on engineering, and I've moved all the equipment and projects to my other company. That left me wondering what to do about the engineering side. I thought about starting fresh, but then I figured, why not just sell the company back to you?" "I don't think I can afford to buy it," I said, skeptical. "I can't pay for both halves." "You don't have to," Gary said. "The company's value has dropped since I stripped it down. I'll sell it to you for what I paid Jim and throw in a 5-year contract for engineering services. Plus, the company still has contracts with about 15 other firms. You'd be walking into a ready-made client base." When he named the price, I realized it was less than what I had stashed in my offshore account. "There's one condition," Gary added. "I talked this over with Maria. If you agree to the deal, she's staying with you instead of transferring to my company." I nodded. "I don't need time to think. I'm in, but I won't finalize anything until my divorce is settled, which will take another 3 weeks." "That works for me," Gary said with a grin. As I left, Maria stopped me. "Don't forget, 3 weeks from now you promised I'd be first on your list." I raised an eyebrow. "I didn't think you were serious about that." Her smile lit up the room. "Oh, I'm very serious." As I drove away, my phone rang again. This time it was my lawyer. He informed me that Jim had learned a hard lesson from his experience with Gary. Apparently, Jim had reached out with an offer to settle the lawsuit Gary filed against him. I told my lawyer to accept it. Back at my temporary apartment at the executive suites, I couldn't stop smiling. In 3 weeks, I'd be starting over. A new life, with a new job, a new girlfriend, and money in the bank. I could have spent that time house hunting and shopping for furniture, but for now, I was just savoring the sweet turn of events. As I sit in my new office, surrounded by blueprints and drafts of projects I once only dreamed of, I can't help but marvel at how far I've come. The past year feels like a distant storm. Its winds violent, its rain unrelenting. Yet here I am, on the other side, not just surviving, but thriving. The betrayal, the anger, the heartbreak, they were all bricks in the road that led me here, teaching me lessons I didn't know I needed to learn. Maria's laughter echoes from the next room as she answers the phone. She's been a constant in my new chapter, as dependable as the sunrise. And though we're taking things slow, there's a warmth between us that feels right. It's not the fiery passion of a whirlwind romance, but something steadier, grounded, a foundation you can build on. Funny how life works. The person I needed was always just a few steps away. Professionally, the company has become a blank slate for me to reimagine. Without Jim's toxicity or Laura's shadow looming, I found a clarity that I didn't realize I lacked. Contracts are rolling in, and I'm assembling a team that shares my vision, people who value integrity as much as I do. There's a satisfaction in creating something from the ashes, knowing that every step forward is mine alone. Occasionally, memories of Laura and Jim creep in, unbidden and unwelcome, but they no longer sting. Time has dulled the edges of their betrayal, leaving me with lessons instead of wounds. From Laura, I learned that love without trust is a hollow thing. From Jim, I learned that even the strongest bonds can snap under the weight of selfishness and deceit. Every so often, I hear whispers of their lives. Jim has bounced between jobs, his reputation in tatters. Laura? Last I heard, she moved out of state trying to start over. I wish them well, not out of forgiveness, but because their stories are no longer tied to mine. I've untangled myself from their chaos, and I have no intention of looking back. As for me, the days are fuller than ever. I've started mentoring younger engineers, finding joy in helping them navigate challenges I once faced. On weekends, Maria and I explore local trails or lose ourselves in conversation over coffee. There's a lightness in my life now, a sense of purpose unclouded by doubt or regret. The scars are there, of course, faint reminders of what I've endured, but I wear them with quiet pride, proof that I faced the storm and emerged stronger. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that endings are rarely the end. They're beginnings in disguise, waiting for us to pick up the pieces and start anew. For the first time in a long time, I'm excited about what's next. Whatever it is, I know I'll face it with the strength I've gained, the lessons I've learned, and the people who truly matter by my side. Life isn't about the storms we weather. It's about the skies we find afterward. And right now, my skies have never been clearer.